stars be with you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Energetic Principles podcast. My name is Melissa LaFara. I'm an astrologer, tarot consultant, all around creative here from sunny San Diego. And today I am so pleased to welcome back the one and only Gray Crawford for our sixth annual Year Ahead podcast. So thanks again for joining me, Gray.
Yeah, thank you for having me. That's wild. I hadn't actually counted in my head that it's been six. But I know we
Six.
started with 2020, which is really cool that we've gone every year through this whole cycle so far with Saturn, Jupiter, and everything else.
That's right. I know. I was doing the math, you have because you think 2020, 2025. It seems like five, but no, it's like perfections. You got to count
Yeah.
2020, 21. I was like, wow, 6 years we have done
Wow.
this on which, you know what? I feel like the fact that we started with 2020 was so apropos, given that we were going into this grand, conjunction cycle, and the world really did change, and we kind of started this tradition during that time. So I'm excited to have Gray back. And just in case you have not watched our year aheads before, any other podcasts that we've done, Gray, share a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Yeah, I'm an astrologer. He does natal consultations. That's one of the big things I do. I also do horary, do some electional, although it's not a huge part of my practice. And I write very regularly on my website, graycrawford.net. I have a Patreon community connected to that where we do monthly meetings and classes and share some other content there. I've more recently this year started doing some YouTube videos too. So that's a more recent thing I've started doing and I'm probably going to do more of going forward.
Yeah, so there's plenty of ways to connect with Gray, whether it's through the writing, the videos, the Patreon, all of the above. So definitely go check Gray out, graycrawford.net.
.net, yeah.
.net. All right. Well, we have so much to talk about here today. 2025. We're halfway through the 2020s. Let's just honor that for a second. I feel, I mean, I think it's a thing with age where you blink and a year goes by, but I cannot believe we're halfway through the decade already. I don't know about you, but it's kind of mind-boggling to think about.
Yeah, and it was interesting when I did that 2020 forecast episode with you. That was the first time I'd ever been on a podcast to do a whole forecast ahead episode, but I'd already been asked to write forecast articles about that year for astrology.com. And so I was already putting myself out there kind of publicly writing about it more than just on my normal website that I normally do. And I knew that year was going to be so immense and had a lot of concern about it, especially related to the big Saturn, Pluto, and eclipse lineup and how Saturn and Pluto are on their own, joining on their own planetary south nodes.
Mm,
And then how it was all going to lead to this great Jupiter Saturn conjunction. And of course, that was way more um, intense symbolism than expected
yeah.
with like the literal lockdowns and everything and the pandemic. But this year, what's interesting that we've been doing it because this has been another year that in a period of time, not just this year, like we're definitely in a really big threshold. We talked about this last year of this year we've been in 2024, really starting to move us towards the second half of the decade and the second half of the first quarter waxing square of the Jupiter Saturn cycle that
Mhm.
started in 2020. And 2025 is really getting things more fully going.
Getting cooking.
And this next couple year period being really a big deal. And I mean, my very first astrologer teacher, Rosie Finn, who's an astrologer here in Olympia, she used to do monthly plants and planet talks with this really brilliant herbalist, Carol Trozado, who would talk about the herbs, and Rosie would talk about the transits. And she was really focused on this time period coming up as far back as like 2009, 2008, and would be talking about it. And so it's always been in my mind, like how significant. Like the person I really first heard, teaching me and talking about transits would focus on this time period. So it's really pretty amazing that we're here
Yeah. Well,
finally
that tells you
finally
something,
coming into
right?
the time period. Yeah, so it's another
Yeah.
year where we knew going into 2020 how important it would be, not fully knowing what exactly what would happen, and we're in a similar situation right now as we're going into 2025. And remarkably, Donald Trump is coming back into
I
office. I'm just
know. Who
realizing that was another thing back then. We had him as a president when we first talked, and now he's coming back around. So that's also interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's well, that's one thing you know about astrology is it's all about cycles.
Hmm.
And so we are going to go through our Trump cycle 2.0. And one of the reasons why Gray and I related to do this first installment, as this will be part one of part two, because there's so much to talk about with 2025 that this will be broken up into two separate episodes so that it can be somewhat digestible for you and us to talk about. But we wanted to wait to the election happen so that there was a better understanding of what we'd be working with, at least here in the US, as far as, because essentially what we're doing here is mundane astrology. We're looking at the planets and these larger cycles and how that can affect us as a collective. So we know that 2025 is going to be a huge year. Of course, if people are talking about it 20 plus years prior, chances are, not to say it's going to be another 2020. It's different things going
No, it's
on,
very
of
different in
course.
2020. Yeah.
It's very different. But there are, especially with what Gray was just referencing, the Jupiter-Saturn square, and the impending Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which Jupiter will tap into in 2025. There is this quarter point, this activation point of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle that's taking place in 2025 that in cardinal signs, nonetheless, that will be very impactful for everybody's, initiating what everybody's initiating in their lives and on the collective sphere too. So I'm just going to run down real quick just some things that are happening, and then we're going to kind of dissect in a general overview before we get into looking at the Capricorn solstice season and the three seasons that follow, and then the Aries equinox, and then the three seasons that follow. And then we're going to drop you right at Cancer season because that's a perfect stopping point for part two. So, what's going on in 2025? Well, we have one of the reasons it's so huge is that we have major ingresses taking place. Jupiter is going to move into Cancer, Saturn and Neptune both into Aries, Uranus into Gemini. And of course, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus will be hovering between signs, much like Pluto did. And really, we have Pluto now fully in Aquarius, which is at the beginning of the sign too. So we're starting to sink into what a Pluto and Aquarius world looks like without going back into Capricorn. We also have this balsamic dance going on between Saturn and Neptune because, and we're definitely going to pick Gray's brain about this because you've done a lot of research, but Saturn Neptune conjunctions coming in early 2026, and they have been in co-presence for 2024 as well, and that's going to be a major theme of 2025. And like I said, we also have Jupiter squaring Saturn and Neptune from Cancer. And then we also have Jupiter squaring Chiron too, which is interesting when you think about some of the eclipses before. But we also have these sextiles taking place. Like there's the tension, but then there's sextiles between Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, which are unique. And maybe I'll stop there and then we'll come into like the retrogrades and the nodal shift. But let's just talk a little bit about those ingresses and those connections with the outer planets.
Yeah, it is absolutely a huge deal. It's in the configuration, it's not just that all these planets are changing signs, it's also sort of the synergy of them coming into these different signs that are an aspect of each other. And it's something that we're going to start seeing in 2025, and it's going to more fully take effect in 2026. And for example, with Saturn and Neptune both going into Aries, they're going to come almost, I mean, for all intents and purposes, a conjunction this coming summer, July of 2025. but there will be something significant that the exact conjunction won't happen until like February of 2026. So one of the things that's such a big deal is that they've all been in these nocturnal, slower, more inward, internal, often called feminine signs. Neptune being in Pisces for a long time, Uranus being in Taurus, Pluto being in Capricorn, and Saturn more recently having been in Pisces as well. And so for them all to move into these outward signs that tend to go faster, that's just, we automatically know there's a big push and change and acceleration of things. And there's lots of ways to look at mundane astrology, but I have found for the whole time of my practice that I've looked at this, these outer planet ingresses are actually meaningful. And there's certainly other types of mundane cycles and symbolism to be looking at, but it is something we see this actually very consistently. And I was even noticing it again because we're speaking right now, right after, like 2 days after Pluto just entered Aquarius for good. And I'm seeing all this stuff is happening that's very relevant to Pluto having made that final ingress. Even though Pluto's already gone a couple times in and out, that final ingress is meaningful. And what makes it even not just that they're all going into these outward moving, faster moving signs, it's that they're also a number of them are hitting these exact cardinal points. So there is something absolutely extraordinary about Saturn and Neptune coming together at the Aries point, 0 degrees of Aries. Um, they've never, from what I've been able to see, going back even like thousands of centuries into BC, have at least I haven't found one ever that's like right on it like this one is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really significant. I mean, that kind of opens up a whole nother like
It's
kind of
it
astrology lesson to talk about. But if we just think about that cardinal axis and how important it is, just basic astrology symbolism, we know these are the signs that start things, they initiate things, that they're gonna always symbolically go with acceleration of events, things moving faster, things coming in faster, and starting something up too. But
has
that
a
air,
Big
yeah,
Bang quality.
Big Bang quality. We
Yeah.
like to look at the Aries ingress chart. We like to look at the Capricorn. We look at the sun ingressing into these signs for a reason, because they help us signify everything that's coming. These are the cross quarter points of the year. Aries equinox is when a tropical sun goes into tropical Aries. It's that incredible day of equal light, equal darkness all around our world. And there is, when we look at declination cycles, what also happens that when we have this intersection of the ecliptic and the celestial equator, planets will then also cross up. They might be in southern declination or northern declination. Some planets go out of bounds in declination. Pluto, in fact, goes into extreme declination. It has throughout its history in Aquarius and Leo. That's why it's so significant. It's actually a book my first teacher, Rosie Finn, has written, and I think is going to be published any day now, but it hasn't yet. Been waiting for her to publish that because she has a lot of research on the importance of Pluto and Aquarius and southern declination. But the
Mm.
thing with Saturn and Neptune hitting that 0 point is in this time period, in the next couple of years, they're going to come up to like zero declination on the celestial equator. There's just also just like there's so much powerful symbolism with that. And we tend to think about, from our northern hemisphere perspective, symbolically that Aries point is a point of increase, and the sun crossing that, going into increasing light towards the solstice. So the Saturn Neptune cycle, as we'll talk about, it's very consistent with huge changes, things that are we can't even conceive of ahead of time. Yes, often it has gone with many revolutions, as has Pluto and Aquarius. Revolutions in thought, revolutions in consciousness, things that completely change the way people even conceive of reality. But the fact that it's actually happening at 0 Aries, it's sort of, we can't emphasize that enough because we tend to think about when things hit that point, they tend to come into reality even kind of stronger.
Hmm.
And so it's just this fascinating thing. What's going to happen with this? I've wondered about it for so long, and it's the fact that it's not just that, it's Saturn and Neptune in Aries, in sextile to Pluto and Aquarius, right? And then here comes Uranus and the Gemini to
Uranus.
trine
Hmm.
Pluto and sextile to Saturn and Neptune. So yeah, it's we'll see what's going to happen, but that's why we know something potentially really immense, like a quality of a new era, feeling like we're in a new era of time, like the sense of reality deeply changing is likely to happen.
I don't know the term, like, people use a lot of like timeline jumping came into my mind right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, the concept of like all of a sudden, we're here one day and then the next day we just quantum leap somewhere else. And it's hard to say what that leap will be, right? We are working with Neptune. It's the idea of Saturn and form and structure and tradition and what has been. And then Neptune has this dissolving factor, but also this empathetic factor. That's why a lot of times there's the connection of like socialism and communism and the fall of such things during, I mean, that's, think about last Saturn Neptune, we think about the Berlin Wall falling and all
hmm
the revolutions that were going on that changed the face of especially Eastern Europe.
the
And
previous
people,
Russian Revolution back in like 1917 time period was also
yeah.
Saturn Neptune. Yeah.
Yeah, and which is interesting to think about because we do see such activity in that kind of sphere of the world right now too, and what that can look like, and I'm really curious to see how Jupiter plays into it as well because that square and that pushing off has definitely been aligned with ramping up a particular type of fight of an ideology or kind of like a belief system, or sometimes you think about Neptune and the fact that Jupiter and Neptune together a couple years ago in 2022 were in Pisces, which can be a very religious sign too. So there's these, I feel like there's these religious components coming up, or these belief
Oh,
systems that
absolutely.
will be a big part of this. And I'm like, one part of me is like, well, okay. The neutral part of me is like, this is fascinating astrology. Let me get my popcorn and I'll sit back and watch. One part of me is like, this is scary as hell. I don't know.
hmm
I don't know what this is going to mean. Like this could go, anyway. And then there's the other part is like, wow, this could potentially be very benevolent if, you look at it from this way. And I think this whole illusory quality of what, uncertainty around what will be, especially in the state of the world that it is in right now, can be a lot to take in. Personally, I don't know if you feel the same way, Gray, or similar, but
Oh,
that's kind of where I'm
absolutely.
at.
And that was definitely one of the reasons because I definitely thought there's a chance, good chance Donald Trump could win. And I definitely wanted to know if that had happened or not before he did. I was hoping to know before he did this because it doesn't let us know what's going to happen, but it definitely gives us more of a sense of how some of these things could show up. And yes, dissolution of belief. Some people are getting more spiritual, more religious, but Saturn, Neptune, it's incredibly multivalent.
Yeah.
And there's really things to be excited about, awakening. And while it can be deaths of dreams, there can be building a dream, but there can also be absolute that more negative, difficult, why it's called the great malefic aspect of Saturn being infused, into this Neptunian field and a dark cast over us. And one of the things is absolutely fundamentalism of belief. Any type of I mean, there could be fundamentalist astrologers even, but religious fundamentalism is definitely one of them. And one way that can show up is certainly Christian fundamentalism. We see the Zionist Israeli fundamentalism
Hmm.
showing up. We can also expect that with Islam and any other religion, but especially the ones that already have that sort of thing where some segments of those groups can show up being fundamentalist and doing things in the world. Um, and so with Donald Trump coming in, I mean, there's so many things to say about this, but just for example, I don't know. if he'll be get through or not. But I was seeing that it looked like Mike Huckabee was picked to be the ambassador to Israel. Mike Huckabee is a religious fundamentalist
Yeah.
who, to my understanding, quite literally believes in the Book of Revelations and is perhaps could be looking at this apocalyptic scenario. That's something a lot of people have talked about related to what's been going on with Israel. And as we're speaking today, for example, even the International Court has not just calling it a genocide, but calling Netanyahu a criminal and calling for his arrest even. And, it's not completely clear where all this is going to be going yet, but I don't really have, hopefully there can be some kind of ceasefire coming, but in the bigger picture, I don't really see there's definitely this whole other side of religious fundamentalism that comes in with Donald Trump. And so on one hand, perhaps programs being cut.
Yeah.
The Department of Education has a nominee who used to run the World Wrestling Federation, right?
It's so absurd.
And a lot of the picks are actually, this is really important with Saturn and Neptune. They are television personalities. The most egregious, perhaps, being Matt Gates. I think that's how you say his name. Who was being
Who
accused
just
of sex
stepped
trafficking.
down.
He just stepped down. So
Yeah.
that was one where we saw nominated. He does fit. Trump is he's great at working the media, and we have to keep this in mind with Saturn Neptune, because one of the things can be, of course, manipulation of what's the messaging and use of media. And we also, this is being paired with Pluto and Aquarius, which is going to go with control of information and even mind manipulation and trying to condition people's thoughts. And so one of the problems is going to be, of course, people are going to want to be aware of what's going on in the world, and people that are more activists will want to be organizing things and taking action. But then there's also a way that can also lead to a lot of distraction in some cases and following the news cycle. And because while we can expect some difficult things to be happening this year, the astrology coming through is very legitimate breakthrough astrology quality of change. And in your personal life, that can be really used by you to make really significant, exciting changes with what you're doing. And that's going to be a big focus to, make sure that we're remembering and keeping in mind. But it is, when we're talking about all that stuff, it's scary. Like, we've definitely seen too with like the Pluto and Aquarius, with the people coming in, Elon Musk taking over X, what's become X, and obviously putting in his viewpoint there. And people like Peter Thiel, who's been very connected to Trump and connected to Vance, who runs Palantir, which is so crazy to me that it's literally named for the Palantirs in the Lord of the Rings, that they're looking through those crystal balls, and then Sauron's coming through and influencing the characters. But that crazy that basically espionage device that's being used to kill all these mass civilians in Gaza, by artificial military, that's run by Peter Thiel, who's really connected to the Trump administration. When I was looking at that, and the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which Biden passed right around the time of the eclipse that went over America earlier this year, Trump was saying he wanted people to kill it because I know he was worried about it being used with him. I don't know if he's going to really kill it. That information, the way, and this also goes back to all the way back to the 2000 Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and 9/11, and the Patriot coming in, and the mass surveillance. And, when Edward Snowden came out and talked about all of this, he literally focused in on them specifically taking information from Palestinian people to give to the Israeli special. And, that's just been continuing going. So it's just a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And where it's interesting because some of the people coming in, there's this religious fundamentalist side of the Pluto in Aquarius combination with Saturn, Neptune that we can see. And there's also this like technologies, people that have all this
Yeah.
money that run technology and run the control of information also coming in. They got behind Trump and wanting more freedom to do what they want. Um, and so I don't know where all
Yeah,
this
the
is going.
deregulation, which
Right.
feels
So
very Saturn Neptune too. Like,
right. And on the one hand, this portrayed over there's more freedom of speech, but it's a lot of times it's a little bit, also propaganda and what they like the freedoms. I mean, that's
well,
my
yeah,
impression
I
a little
mean
bit. Like
they
what they think is like what they want to hear more. But because we're going into potentially deregulation, things getting cut, even more of a mass transfer of wealth. Um, it does open. It's not that I think there's a way that people just kind of got to jump into it and move with it, and you might need to be getting more involved in your local community, depending on what's cut or what happens to education or all these. There's so many unknowing, but we can already see how with the way things are already starting to move, and we project that forward with where things are going. It's this rapid change coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even thinking about one of the main, things that Donald Trump says all the time is like, especially with the abortion issue, is it's a state issue. It's a state issue. And it makes me
Right.
wonder how many things are going to become state issues rather than, federal issues or, subsidies or et cetera. And then it'll be up to the states, and then the states will come down to the counties and the cities, and sort of this localization of like, how can we band together to get what it is that we need, because we can't rely on, the the structure that has kind of held that up, and how well it's held it up, and that's the thing where it's hard to say. It's like, yeah, that seems devastating to have like Department of Education cut, but like how well has it been functioning too? And so maybe so we have to leave room for like the creative aspect that all this can bring,
Oh,
because like what you were
yeah.
saying before is like, obviously, when we have all these big collective changes, we are part of the collective. So our personal lives are going to be affected. And so we can then take this energy and get creative about the changes and what we're initiating in our lives and in our communities, and how we can I mean, it's only natural for humans to want to make a better life for themselves, right? And so we're just going to be there again. And so it's just going to look a little bit different. And the whole idea of like the power structure, because I think that's a very big part of the whole
Hmm.
0 degrees Aries thing is, I mean, it literally is connected with world leaders as a whole. So just the whole idea of like who's in charge, that whole story is going to re-solidify, also fall away. Like some people are just going to disappear, and then other people will just rise to and so anyways, there's a lot to
Yeah,
unpack there.
definitely change there. And it's interesting with like Aries also being the exaltation of the sun, which does connect to the sun and like the center and that kind of thing. And then where with Pluto in Aquarius, the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, with the Pluto in Aquarius, I think is just so significant because of especially even more because of that Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, which is
Yeah.
obviously opposite Leo,
Yeah.
also the sun. And we saw, like, for example, in this recent election, Kamala Harris bringing out these like celebrities that didn't help her at all, and there
Yeah. The
we
death of the
definitely saw
celebrity.
that yeah, that not working. Um,
Although it's
but
interesting to see the other side of thing where what you brought up earlier, where we're starting to see celebrities in positions of power. So in one ways they're not working to come in and be like, oh, we're the message, and the Hollywood says this. But then there's this other side of celebrity that's being put onto a pedestal. Especially maybe more news related celebrities, like not like typical like box office, it's like
no, but
celebrities that deal with talking about reality or what they deem to
yeah,
be
like
reality.
like there's been being people picked that are like in some cases they literally are a TV personality, like Dr. Oz or I forget what the
TV
guy's
over
name.
movies.
Yeah, the guy that was involved in the military and he's been on Fox News. I'm spacing out on his name. It's but yeah, people that are all very good. They all look the part. They know how to communicate, use media. You don't always have a whole team of people brought in like that. There's a pretty high percentage of them. But yeah, that combination of Aquarius and we can see these like long-term, something long-term changing and that Aquarian shift away from like the Capricorn, but then the Aries quality coming in so strong at the same time. Um, and then as we'll talk about this whole year beginning with this Mars retrograde in Leo, this whole Leo sun symbolism just really volatilized and breaking
Yeah.
down and conflicts around these Leo people and symbols. And then we're going to go into like, before Saturn and Neptune go into Aries, we're going to have Venus retrograde in Aries and Mercury retrograde in Aries. Like these signs are really kind of shaken up and that we can see all these power conflicts. I mean, it's just going to be really chaotic, I think, and lots of things
Hmm.
we don't even know about because so much about this stuff also is like behind the scenes, and there's lots of different theories people
Yeah.
have about what's actually going on, and
So
so
many theories. So many
yeah, so many
theories.
theories. And so, but in our lives, we can expect within this disorder and very chaotic ferment, there is real opportunity to make changes. And I think that's one of the key things. And with Saturn and Neptune, it's also very much going all in on the force of love and actually structuring in time for community and and joy and getting together with people with people and like you're there's going to be need to be an active even more than you maybe already do in your life, um focus on
Yeah.
that, really consciously focusing on that with really strong and not just intention but doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what happens when these planets move into these energies. It's like, if you haven't done it before, maybe that's because, you're not activated there yet, but now we're getting
Hmm.
activated there. So it'll be uh there'll be more opportunity to engage like that. And yeah, so it is interesting, because one of the things that's just so potent, especially about this early part of the year, which we'll get into here shortly, is how much back and forth energy is going on between Pisces and Aries. Like we're talking about the end
Hmm.
of complete end, the transcendence of a particular cycle, and that, just those mutable waters and into this cardinal fire. And so we're dancing in between these two areas. And I know one of your favorite words, Gray, is liminal, living in the
Liminal, yeah.
um, yeah.
Well,
And
and with
yeah, go ahead.
with the liminal, though, I mean, when I think about Pisces, Aries, because of my particular chart, I live that and have thought about
You
quite
are
a
the
lot.
liminal.
Um, yeah, I have things that are on either side and right at literally at the transition between the signs in my chart that are really important in my chart. One of the unifying principles of that bridge from Pisces to Aries to me is Eros. And that goes with that force of love and really the primordial Eros who, emerges like multi-sexed and um at the dawn of creation, that creative Eros, not just like the little Cupid sidekick of Aphrodite, but that more primordial Eros.
Feels
There's
like
a
an
real
orgy.
strong
I'm just gonna go ahead and say that.
connection between but Pisces and Aries, that connection between them, I think about that a lot. I mean, even in the yeah. And so I think that connection, there's going to be a lot of there will be things happening that will be disillusioning to people and upsetting, going on in the world. There already is. And um but as this dissolution that's going to go on, it does create a very liminal situation, like you're saying. And as part of whatever is going on is going to be how do you really connect into, letting yourself open to more of the not knowing
Yeah.
and being really curious what's emerging. I mean, we already see all these people, these political pundits that were saying what was going to happen and they were wrong. if you've all probably heard astrologers saying they're telling you what's going to happen. And as far as those astrologers, I haven't seen one yet that I haven't seen already be wrong about something pretty significant with their predictions that are saying things are certainly going to happen. Um, and so we don't really know. And the things everyone always talks about with these transits coming up are like there's going to be a civil war, there's going to be a world war. I mean, the world's already at war. That's something we know something is going on with that. But I think to step back from some of those types of predictions, a lot of that's coming from the last time Neptune was in Aries was when the Civil War started.
Hmm.
Uranus and Gemini always has gone with the U.S. being involved in a war. We've been involved with a war since basically 2001. I
And
mean,
beyond. We've
we,
been
but yeah,
in war forever.
we've already actively been involved in war for, I mean, this entire, because one of the things about this age of air that I've really actually been thinking a lot about is, when we look at the tropical conjunctions, there was that one in we entered the 1980s with the first tropical conjunction in Libra. In 2000, we come into the 2000s with the tropical in Taurus, and then 2020s it's in Aquarius, and all the tropical ones will be in Aquarius until like 2159. But that actual 200-year cycle is based on the mean conjunctions, which is this more mathematical conjunction cycle. And that actually started in 2000 in Gemini. And so from that mean, which the mean conjunctions become more of an orderly 200-year cycle. And so I've been thinking a lot about the fact that I think there's a lot of validity, even more so to me with Trump winning, about the validity of the air era really starting in 2000, even though it was a tropical Taurus conjunction, that the mean conjunction with Gemini, because, we have, for example, with Trump, he has this whole reality show. We have this reality show president, right, who's now really bringing in a very literal reality TV cabinet,
Yeah.
and he really comes into that more increased visibility. Then we also get into all these wars then that we've never really stopped being in. I mean, I know the US has always been at war, like you're saying, behind the scenes in one way or another, but um you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And the other thing about those predictions of saying those will absolutely happen, and maybe they will in some one way or another. I mean, there's obviously some kind of global warfare that's going on and there's all things going on with people change. We can see things happening with that. But it's not even this is another where I always think about, like, when are there like these mainstream thoughts? So many people that have nothing to do with astrology for years have been seeing this. They even made a Hollywood movie about the Civil War happening. It's not like some radical astrology prediction. It's just like most people is thinking about what's going to happen. Not, well, a lot of people is thinking. And one thing about Saturn and Neptune, I would just say, is that it really is something that can bring something in that we were not expecting. I was too young, honestly, at the last one to fully remember what that was like. I remember it, but I wasn't like an expert on things. I was like 13. I was like 13 years old.
You were grunging out. You're
13,
really, yeah.
14. Yeah.
Just puberty.
I was like
That's
in
what I
middle
remember.
school. But
Yeah.
we had all in China. I mean, the Tiananmen Square didn't work. That was massively shut down brutally by the Chinese government. But you think about that massive, incredible Tiananmen Square rebelling, and the whole Berlin Wall coming down, the Soviet Union completely dissolving. These are things, and then we go even further back with like the Copernicus revolution is something that's a little bit more of a Pluto and Aquarius thing. But when we look at the Saturn Neptune cycle across time, um, it's very consistently coming in with these eras of like our conception of reality really dramatically changing. And there's definitely, I know some people, one way they're thinking about this is like UFOs or potential aliens, but there's even something I feel like beyond, like going to a heliocentric revolution, just how mind-blowing that is to blow up things, right? And we've seen religion the power of religion, religious control fall in the past with how these cycles converge and monarchies fall. Our basic conceptions of reality fall. So it's something to be aware of, that there's things that can come in that there's sort of narratives people all have, or seeing things are going to happen a certain way. Just be more open to what is actually happening for you. And I think that I am excited about the potential for personal change and personal creativity, and what we can do in our networks of support and community. Um, I'm, with the bigger picture events in political world, I'm not gonna pretend I'm gonna make predictions about that stuff.
I
But
know.
does that kind of make
It's
sense? Kind of sorry, I just
absolutely.
went off on a whole thing
No,
there, but
I
yeah.
feel like that. I think that's a really good point, because it's like, I feel like the best thing that we can predict right now is just the level of uncertainty that we all have to live within, how everything is changing. And even like what you're bringing up, like the concept of reality shifting, of like how we view it, because essentially it all comes down to our individual perceptions. It's like, the idea is like I read this quote before in a previous podcast that I did myself, but I'll say it again. It's like, you do not exist in the world exists within you. You have the power to shift your point of awareness, because we're all looking at the world through our own eyes. And it'll be interesting to see, as we go through this uncertainty of like what's going to manifest, our own thought patterns within it, because we're going to see what we want to see, which is essentially what people make predictions of. Is like there's some sort of level of their own understanding that they're going to marry into their prediction. But that's kind of like the very interesting thing about this year, and these changes, and Uranus and Pluto together, and this push of the air age even further, is like what you're talking about with like Copernicus, and thinking about this heliocentric reality. It's like, well, what if we get this information that takes us to these different quantum levels, which all of a sudden we're understanding just how like the brain works, or like the fields of perception that we're in, or all these different dimensions. People talking about like 5D reality for so long now. But
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah,
there's
there's
certainly with
yeah.
quantum, some kind of development with quantum or whatever yeah, that's all stuff that really, something really pretty significant could happen. I
But we
guess one
don't
of the
know.
thing about Saturn Neptune, one thing I noticed that across time is that they tend to move in these quadruplicity cycles, and so they'll be in like a cardinal sign for a series of conjunctions, and then they move into actually they don't go cardinal fixed, they go cardinal mutable fixed, cardinal mutable
It's like the
fixed.
nodes.
Yeah, and so actually that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way. But we're in a cardinal one, obviously, because we're in Aries, and we had Capricorn last time, and before that we had Libra. So there's something, and then in 20, I think it's 61, we go to I think it's Gemini. We'll go to the
Yeah.
mutable. But when I've looked at those, like the last time we were in this, and like the last time we had Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, actually, like 1703 was like, that's like the age of enlightenment. And you go back to the previous cardinal one before, it really brought in like what's called like the Renaissance, like with the Italian Renaissance and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the one we're in started in like 1952, 1953. Literally, like for one, in American pop culture, it's like the month before. The first one was like the month before Elvis Presley walks in a recording studio to record himself for the first time, and come to the attention of what became Sun Records. But it was also the time of like MK Ultra in the United States, where we talk about how these like mind control, and
Mm-hmm.
like actually testing people with like psychedelic drugs, which they also will talk about, though, how eventually, though, that's kind of how it got all into the country, and it led to like all this stuff in the 60s with the Pluto Uranus conjunction, which we're now coming into the trine with.
Yeah.
And so in any, when we think about those 50s too, like there's like the a thing with Saturn Neptune is also often witch hunts, and we had like the Red Scare and
Mm.
the communist Red Scare. Um with like McCarthyism in Congress. There certainly could be some echoes of that now. We have people like Arthur Miller writing about the Salem witch trials. If you go back to the Salem witch trials, that was a Saturn Neptune time.
Well,
But
it makes me think though, because that's one of
yeah,
the things that people talk about Trump is like, yeah, they're going to get him, he's going to be in office and he's putting all his people in office and then he's going to hunt down all, this
yeah,
idea of
we'll have
like
to see.
revenge.
Yeah,
I don't know what his plan is or what he's going to do. Like I said, I'm in this space of
yeah,
accepting comfort within uncertainty, but what you're saying makes me think of that.
yeah.
Um,
But since that time, there's also been, well, I also think about that time with like television coming in, and then, everyone starts realizing how television
mm,
is, brainwashing everybody, controlling everybody. And now it's like obviously off the beyond, people's wildest dreams of being able to brainwash people with us all
the
on our phones all the
phones.
time. And
Yeah.
yeah. But um also the quantum stuff though, like when you're bringing that
Mm.
up, I mean that was already going on, but there's been so many more things that have happened since then.
It'll
So
just accelerate. I mean, you think about the whole
accelerate,
idea of the
yeah.
trine. It's just I have a feeling there's just going to be like breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough, and it's all the
Yeah.
beginning. Well, and what's
Yeah.
interesting to think about too is that that trine is going to happen. Uranus is going to be on the point. If we want to break up into bigger cycles, Uranus is going to be on the point where Neptune and Pluto conjunct, back in like the late 1800s and like
All
being in
right.
this
That's a
whole,
good point.
Gemini
Hmm.
cycle. And then even right now we're talking about like we're being brainwashed by our phones, and just thinking about this Neptune Pluto action, which is so long in cycle. We're talking about centuries and centuries. But it's in this Gemini place and this,
And
yeah.
all if they keep expanding FISA, they keep expanding it, which honestly also came in. FISA came in like 1978. That was a Saturn Neptune cycle. That's people were born with that 78, 79
Hmm.
waning square of the Saturn
Mm-hmm.
Neptune cycle. But they keep expanding it, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And so, yeah, it's not just like the manipulating us with phones, but like it's literally everything taken and stored that can just be seized, especially in that act if you're talking to anybody in another country, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that going on, but at the same time, I just want, should move into the
I
transits, and
know
I know,
we can we can
but
get lost in
because
this.
there are things that are coming in that I just feel like if we have anything coming in with astrology that can actually wake up people, especially like more working class, the non multi-billionaires, when people use like 1% or even smaller than the 1%, if there's anything that can do it is the Saturn Neptune combination with everything else is what could actually really make something happen. And this next couple year period is actually really critical to try to get something going. And I had been afraid of a lot of if Donald Trump hadn't won the election, if there would be more violence coming in that way. But now that it's him, I mean, he's been going to be, even though he always gets out of things, it seems like he will be held accountable. And I mean, I see there's a lot of resistance that could be coming into what he's trying to do. So
Yeah.
just really be open to what can happen. And sometimes it's there's that embrace of uncertainty, and it can be difficult, but we're moving into such a fast changing time that it's gonna have to be like letting go of like of way things have been, and really trying to embrace what the change coming in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, folks, that's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of potential there too. Like that's the thing that's so important to remember about all this is that we don't know. We have to own that we don't know, and because we don't know means it can be creative.
Right.
So, just a couple things, and we're not going to really talk about them. We'll talk about them as we look at the chart. But some of the other things which Gray alluded to earlier is, of course, we start the year with Mars retrograde in Leo and in Cancer. We also have Venus retrograding through Aries and Pisces. I can't wait to talk about that time period with you. And we have Mercury retrograde still taking place in fire signs, but they're going to start to dip their toes into water And we'll also see those the superior conjunctions move from air to earth too. So there'll be some shifts in the Mercury cycle. And last but certainly not least, we are going to have a nodal shift first thing in January
Yes,
when
that's really big.
Pisces is, yes. Maybe we'll do lip service to that once we get into the charts.
Yeah.
But it'll be moving into Pisces and Virgo, away from Aries and Libra. And there'll still be one more Aries solar eclipse, but from essentially here on out, we are in Pisces and Virgo land. And those are going to have conjunctions, North Node conjunctions with Saturn and Neptune. And there's going to be eclipses with
Right.
Saturn and Neptune. So Saturn and Neptune is definitely huge. And okay, so I'm going to share the screen. We're going to look at things, but I just want to ask real quick, Gray, because I actually rewatched last night, your uh, Caught Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea that
Oh,
you
okay.
did in 2022.
On Saturn and Pisces.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Gray did a wonderful webinar. I don't know, are you selling that? Do you have that on your site?
Yeah, I do have it on my site. People can buy it. Yeah, there's actually more than one version of it on my site, actually, because I gave that a
Oh,
version of that different times and redid it. So yeah,
what I
there's a few
I can't
versions
remember.
of it on my site.
I think I saw the first version, but
Yeah.
one of the things that I really found interesting was your alluding to the idea of the downward spiral
Mm,
effect of Saturn
hmm.
and Neptune, especially in this
Yeah.
balsamic part, right? Because
Yeah.
all of 2025 is essentially this balsamic phase, like the darkest of darkest phases of Saturn Neptune. And as we sit here and talk about uncertainty and liminal and like being pulled down and under and like it's I don't know, I found that concept very fascinating and it's kind of sticking in my head about like what this year could potentially look like, but also the creative like bursts that can then come out of it once we're kind of like sucked down in, to
Well,
that
and
lowest
that's
form.
partially from the older astrological symbolism with temperament, that Saturn being an extreme, malefic being excessively cold and dry, and that cold quality, that's part of like the melancholic. And Pisces is a water sign, so Pisces also has a symbolism of being cold and wet. So that coldness, you're putting a cold, excessive cold planet in a cold water sign. So that's that downward
Mm,
spiral. But with that and with melancholy, though, there's also great imagination possible. Saturn can like take us down, penetrate into deep subject matter at our own expense. We can get just so focused on it
yeah.
that we're neglecting our health and other things. But yeah, it can be very imaginative, very creative, and so can Pisces. And we also have Neptune there. So it is sort of like you're saying, both things. And that salutes also, like the idea of like the solutio chemical phase and things as things are dissolving. One thing I thought about was like the idea of like a cauldron, um, with that, and like kind of what you're holding within your
Mm.
cauldron, intending with things dissolving, because there is then the idea of the solution. I mean, it's one of those literal metaphors that the solution is the solution. It's a solution of things
Yeah.
dissolving, and it's kind of like that things being broken down like the prima materia, so something can come forth. And that configuration in the summer of 2026, I think it was maybe S.J. Anderson, somebody was calling it like a hand basket,
The
I think,
bucket or something,
or a
or not the
bucket or
bucket. No,
something,
I think about the
maybe
basket.
basket or something. I've thought
Yeah.
about it as like it also looks to me like a cauldron. That's kind of what I
Oh,
like that idea. And
it's a container.
yes, and a take I really love. I remember asking Rick Levine what he thought of this when I got to hang out with him at one point, and I loved his response. I was like, "What do you think's gonna happen?" He's like, "I don't know." He's like, "Anybody that tells you they think is full of BS." And I was like, "Yeah, I totally agree with you." And he talked a lot about that idea, sort of if we think about a cauldron or something like a metal form, and how we're in this period of like being able to still shape, like it hasn't totally taken form yet. And after 2026, it will be more solidified. But I actually love that metaphor. It's the way I also think about this when I was saying like this next 2 years, we can kind of help hope to help shape what's coming in. But with Saturn having recently stationed direct at this recent full moon in Taurus conjunct Uranus, we have Saturn now moving direct, and this across this whole next part of the year, we're going to be talking about Saturn will move all the way, right behind Neptune into Aries. And like you said, Saturn's going to hit the North Node, the head of the dragon. There's going to be an eclipse. Eclipses hitting it. There's so much more coming. And that talk I was given, referencing was more like, we're in this kind of, now we're turning into like it's still a downward spiral, but it's turning into more of a cyclone or a tsunami perhaps, or whatever. Like things are going to start. We're coming into a different reality of this Saturn Neptune, even though I know people have probably already been feeling it. Like we haven't really seen it yet the way we're going to. So that's something to really keep in mind with this.
Yeah.
And like you said, it can be actually very creative. It can be creative. It really can be.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the blessing of being human, right? Is we were given the gift of creativity to, like life is essentially a problem. And you can focus on the problem and like just be like, oh, life is full of problems, or well, life is full of problems because we're constantly evolving into our creativity and our solutions to kind of get back to the solution aspect of things.
Right.
So as long as we can just kind of accept the fact that no matter where we're at, there's always going to be a problem. And so let's get creative about the solution and use that as fuel to create the life within the container that we have. Our container is changing, but we can, do what we can to work with it, see where we end up. So let us get into some of the specifics here. We have, if you're watching the video on YouTube, we're looking at the Capricorn solstice chart, which happens on December 21st, 2024. We're going to look at charts based in Washington, just because, if we start to talk about anything US based, it's probably just good to have it there. But right away, and why we're not starting with January 1st, right? Because essentially we're going into the new cycle with the cardinal solstice here, and it is a big one because we have this Jupiter Saturn component going on with Jupiter in Gemini, Saturn in Pisces over here. And in the solstice chart, we actually have a moon in Virgo that is squaring all of it. So talk about activation, mutable activation. We also have this Mars retrograde component getting ready to oppose Pluto here. And so, I mean, there's probably other things going on, but that's what pops out immediately. Gray, thoughts on kind of the entrance into Capricorn season and this Jupiter Saturn square time?
Yeah, well, one thing like you started drawing on there with Mars Pluto, I mean, that's clearly really starting to build and intensify as we come into this, and that's going to go in places, that's going to be a real intense passage of Mars Pluto and power conflicts going on in the world in major ways. But I do always think with the combination of that with what else, the other things we're talking about here, there is that like burning quality of that Mars and in our lives, connecting in with what is this inner fire that's sort of like melting down and, reforging things in our life. That sort of process is going to be extreme. Because Pluto is involved, though, it can be potentially personally empowering if you're able to connect into that side of thing. But what's really remarkable about that and the bigger power conflicts going on in the world is that Jupiter Saturn square coming into almost exactness, like not at the solstice chart. That alone would be so powerful. But then the fact that the moon is in Virgo, just exactly opposing Saturn.
I mean, exactly.
It's so right in on it that it just magnifies the fact that we're in this Jupiter Saturn square. So we had the first one in August. This is the second one. and then we'll have one more later on
In June.
in June once they change signs, and that'll be Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Aries. So this is sort of like the waxing moon first quarter square of the Jupiter Saturn cycle, which in this level, on one hand, we're talking about big societal
Yeah.
changes going on that are rooted back in that end of 2020. But we can still see that obviously going on in our own personal lives. And if you, if you remember, so this similar dates would have been back in 2000. So there was that conjunction before in 2000. So kind of towards the end of 2005 and then across 2006, there was one then. And if you remember even before that, if you're old enough, in the 80s, there was the 1981, and then one came in more like, I think it was 86. Yeah, 86, which in that time was sort of like, Reagan's been president, 86 comes in, we have like the Iran-Contra affair, we have Chernobyl, 2000, obviously the war in Afghanistan started really escalating even more when this square came in. But one thing I was thinking of relating to everything going on now with like this air era is I was reading some about like Peter Thiel and these tech people that are coming in really strong right now. And in 2007, right after that square, there was this Fortune magazine cover where it was called the PayPal Mafia, and all these people involved in PayPal, including him and other people, were dressed up like mafia people. And there was just all these tech things were forming around that time and coming into more power, where there, all these different apps. I don't get into all the different details of that, but we saw that coming in really strong at the last square back in 2006, 2005, 2006. Like, I mean, Facebook, for example, would have been really ascending through that time. But now we have something similar coming off of like 2000. And so we definitely will see big restructurings of things. But one thing what I think about with this square is, in our personal lives, it can really be a time of growth and developing things. And of course, there's a tension between Jupiter and Saturn in the square, and you can't just like do whatever you want. You got to expand within these
Within
certain
reason.
limits. Yeah, of Saturn. They're not in that, Jupiter's in its opposite sign of Gemini. Saturn's just in Pisces, which Saturn doesn't really have anything to do with, but it is Jupiter's sign. So they're not like in really strong essential dignity places for either of them in that way. And that what is interesting is where we'll go with the year once we get into June, is that there ends up being this big
Yeah.
discrepancy between them, of Saturn being in the fall of Saturn, Jupiter being exalted by the end of this. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so it's really kind of thinking about, if you can think about your life big picture wise since 2000 and everything that's happened, everything you've been working on or building and developing, this is like, it just really signifies this being this really key year coming in here. It's so embedded in the solstice chart.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much going on in the sense right away with the moon, Jupiter, Saturn piece and the tension there. It's like, it makes me think, especially with Virgo energy and the moon lighting up there. Like Virgo just has this like cleaning up and clearing out quality and more of like the tangible space. So it's almost like, you think about the double-bodied energy of mutable signs and being able to kind of live in these two worlds. And that Virgo piece to me seems to be like, okay, well, things are starting to shift. You're not there yet. There's still uncertainty, but, thoughts are forming as to how, you're going to bring your life forward and the potentialities that are there. And then it feels like there's going to be some tension to move pieces of the material world to start to fit maybe some of the things that we're thinking about, or and it won't be like a total thing, like we're in total transition here, but to me this feels more activating in the sense that, that Mars retrograde in Leo opposing Pluto does have that empowerment component, but it also has that pressurizing, like
Hmm.
volatility with what is fixed to begin with, that then the mutable can come in and be like, all right, it's almost like, the maybe something that is very solid is thrown into the cauldron and we start to mix
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Definitely
Um,
a lot of that Mars Pluto, like you're right, it can be empowering, but also definitely going to be felt with a lot of pressurized,
yeah.
and that's is something we can also see with the Jupiter Saturn could feel that way too, for sure. But
And what I
definitely,
mean, just
yeah, mutable
lit,
transition for sure into
yeah.
this new,
And well,
yeah.
literally what you were talking about earlier with like tech folks and like tech changes
Hmm.
and like things being announced and unleashed, and you can't help but think about this Mars retrograde in Leo and sort of the position of power, and the
Hmm.
politics opposing this Pluto zone, and thinking about all these people that are in the tech field, that are being put in tech people that are very wealthy too. That's very Pluto and
Hmm.
Aquarius, and hear that tension and what
And
their mission is, and like how things are starting to be unleashed, but we're not quite there yet, right? Because we're going to get one more opposition of Mars and Pluto here, so stay tuned for that. But
right.
there's a very, once again, this uncertain space, this pressurized space, but also this activation to get clever and kind of clear out the physical world in relation to how things are growing, but also constricted at the same time. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
Oh,
kind of how I'm seeing
definitely.
it.
And those of you that might be watching this before this time, and perhaps the Mercury retrograde and Sagittarius is so happening, that is like a real key piece. I feel like that kind of, because this is after Mercury's
Yes.
gone direct, but the Mercury retrograde interestingly hits all this with the Saturn and the Jupiter, even a little bit of the Neptune. So this is after the Mercury retrograde and Mercury coming back through. So it's really fascinating how um the mutable signs are all configured like that, and then Jupiter and Mercury being in their opposite signs, but the mutual reception, which I think can be again very creative personally, and there is some support available there like in our personal lives, but I think in the collective we're going to continue to see these like really inflated propaganda and just like stuff all over the place like we're seeing right
Yeah.
because we're as we're talking right now we have this actually going on, but it's a long
Yeah.
Mercury Jupiter opposition, whereas we're recording this now,
It
it's
is.
happening, and then it's
Yeah.
still happening by the time we get here because of the Mercury retrograde. Yeah.
And everybody has their opinions and everybody has their
Yeah.
beliefs. And I can't even tell you how many people are coming out of the woodwork that I've like seen people like totally change their social medias, that they'd be like,
Hmm.
I can no longer stand not sharing my truth and being, and I'm like, and it just, I'm so much of the Sagittarius soapbox, and honestly I have to chuckle at it sometimes because like you think about, especially, well, Sagittarius energy, but especially Mercury and Sagittarius, it's like the great convincer. Like,
Hmm.
like, let me just convince you of this thing that I so wholeheartedly believe, and like, and it's, you just ramp it up, and there's just so much of that going on right now. So everybody will probably
Right.
listen to this before that retrograde, or actually this will probably release around the time that the retrograde happens.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's totally a thing. But so let us
But
go. Oh, go ahead.
no, just keep going. That's fine. I was gonna throw in
Um,
a counterpoint about Mercury and Sag, but not needed right now. Let's go
oh,
forward. Yeah.
that is very Mercury and Sag, isn't it?
Let's go.
That's so funny. All right. So, a couple days later, right before Christmas, if you celebrate Christmas Eve, we have that Jupiter Saturn perfects. So
Yeah.
it's baked into our holiday season here.
Yeah.
Um, And then once we get to the beginning of the year, here
And
for
that's where
New
Mercury
Year's,
Mercury right at that transition of the year, you can see when you was kind
yeah,
of going across them and yeah, into the yep. Hmm.
Oh yeah, because we
I guess
had
it was a little
the
bit. I guess it was a little bit earlier. It was more like the
yeah.
20th,
So we
the
get so
27th. Yeah.
don't you love how Mercury and Jupiter are going to oppose each other in their mutual reception detriment, right? When people are going to be traveling all over
Hmm.
the place. I find it so cosmically hilarious that every time we do these broadcasts, there's something about holiday season that is just kind of effed up for travel or can be.
It kind
Or
of has been like that in some of the past
it
years. Yeah.
really has. So just be aware if you're out there. It may go smoothly for you, but you know what? I'm going to say Mercury, Saturn, Jupiter, T square. Maybe
Yeah.
not.
But
Be flexible.
I do really like, and those of you listening to this, that the Mercury retrograde's still going on, that would definitely be a time where, again, it's always good anyway to embrace some of that uncertainty and not feeling like you have all the answers and letting yourself see what
Yes.
comes out. Because Mercury, the way it
Or when you're at
retrogrades
the dinner
back, and then
table
it,
with your family.
yeah, the way it retrogrades back and then comes forward again. I like it. I feel like Hermes is showing up to have us really connect into this Jupiter Saturn cycle in a really powerful way. So that energy is just really strong as we come to the end of 2024 and we go that, and the combination of that and then the Mars Pluto like
Yeah.
really intensifying is what's really happening there.
Yes. So that essentially, like at the end of the year, we have a new moon in Capricorn just a couple days before we move into 2025 officially. So which is kind of nice when you think about it. We start the year off this new moon cycle. But you can see this new moon is baked into this Mars retrograde Pluto story. So it's kind of like the I mean, it is and it isn't, but it's reminiscent of the Scorpio new moon that was also baked in
Mm,
with I mean, different because that Scorpio new moon was ruled by that Mars and the last degrees of Cancer and Capricorn. But we have another, so we're gonna get the, most of January is going to carry on this Mars retrograde Pluto action, which perfects on the first or the second of January.
but it definitely has. This is a year where we actually do have this quality of an ending and a beginning, and this, actual new moon happening at the very end of the year. So, and the way that's then configured to sextile, forming a sextile with Saturn.
Yeah.
Saturn's what, like less than 13 degrees away from Neptune here. I think there's also a strong quality of the new year starting with this like new moon, and
Ooh, that was a bad.
it's connected to Saturn Neptune. So again, it's just, this is a time where I feel like we can really connect into what's going on with this early stages of the Saturn Neptune dissolution, which, as we're saying, it's going to get way more extreme in the next few months after this. But yeah, we're really
Yeah.
going into it here.
And it's, especially here in the US, this is going to be, the lunation that the inauguration cycle's under.
Yeah.
So, that's important to remember too. So, so we literally start the new year with a bang, so to speak, with this Mars Pluto action. So, which can
Hmm.
be very activating, the whole, adage of pressure makes diamonds, right? So if you're feeling that in your own life, chances are this can be, sort of little oomph that you get, because at
Hmm.
this point we have had Mars has been retrograde for I don't know what 3.5 weeks now, for 3.5 weeks,
Hmm.
because it went retrograde on December 6th, 7th, somewhere around
Hmm.
that point there. So we're settling in. We're getting our second round of Pluto, but we also get a little sweet spot on the second two. Is Venus will move into Pisces, which actually I like this sort of. So it's an it's an interesting day how we have both Mars and Pluto together, but then Venus moves into her exaltation spot and the moon crosses over her around that time. Oh, that's my
Right.
partner's birthday. Interesting. Uh maybe we'll do something nice then.
Yeah.
Um yeah,
Yeah, and
so go
it's a
ahead.
big co-presence of Venus, exalted
Yes.
Venus with Saturn, Neptune, and it is interesting. The moon is just amplifying it here because this will be going on for, I mean, many, many months
Yes.
because Venus will end up having three conjunctions with Saturn. She's going to go into Aries, come back. So she's going to go backwards and forwards, forwards and backwards and forwards again across Saturn, Neptune.
Yeah, she will be doing a dance with this Saturn Neptune, and she'll also be doing a dance with the nodes. So it's a Venus, Saturn, Neptune, and the nodes are very intertwined, especially once we get into the March, April realm. So stay tuned for that. But
Yeah,
know
and
that,
hmm.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry, keep going.
Oh no, I was just gonna say know that she's gonna be here for a while. So
Yeah, it was just making me think of, it's a complicated thing because on one hand we can think about Venus, she's exalted, but there's this, you know, all the Saturn Neptune themes we're talking about are clearly going to be impacting the quality of that exalted Venus.
yes,
But if you have significant things in Pisces, there's always a complicated thing. We've seen this with other configurations in the past where, Venus coming in there, though, in some ways, like you're saying, a little bit of sweetness. I mean, there is a little bit of that. It's like, well, now, like you've been having Saturn doing something in your chart for all this time with Neptune, and now Venus is there too. So it does actually bring this Venus element into whatever's been going on for you with Saturn, Neptune, and that story. So, and again, it could be interesting in terms of creative explorations and art forms and things like that. Anybody that's working in that kind of way, as far as what kind of can get developed. I mean, just again, a
yeah,
long period. This is going to play out over the whole. I mean, into actually the whole next quarter. I mean, it's going all the way through the
it's
Aries
a long one.
ingress. It's a long story coming in here. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. A bunch of this. I mean, the Mars Pluto is another really long one. Um, but again, there could be difficult things going on with this. I mean, this is and so it's one of those things just to get through and see where you can let things lead you because it is big change. I mean, when you think about the first Mars Pluto opposition was in early November, shortly before the U.S. presidential election. It was at the end of the cardinal signs, so it had a little bit more of that cardinal quality of like, and we saw like lots of fast change happening.
Oh yeah.
It's interesting how they end up in the fixed signs though. So it always makes me think then about, these are some more long-term things changing, but we're only partway through the story here. Like it's going to feel intense here, but keep in mind Mars goes back into Cancer for all comes forward again. It's not until like later in April that we get out of these Mars Pluto oppositions. So it's a long, long story here. So this is only
Yeah.
one stage of whatever's going on.
Yeah. So, and I think that's a very important thing to remember as we get into this time of the year is that a lot of things that we're going to be talking about here, due to retrograde motion, we're coming back over. So it's not like, oh, this happens and then that's that. It's like
Hmm.
we're doing a dance with a story that is
Hmm.
multifaceted and
Hmm.
has chapters that unleash over time.
Hmm.
And maybe that's where Venus can help us in this idea of relaxing into sort of the liminal that we're talking about, where it's like, okay, well, this is going on, but I have to open up to this Pisces, open up to this mutable, because essentially and there can be tension because she's going to be ruled, as with all this Pisces energy, is going to be ruled by that Jupiter in Gemini, which is not necessarily a go with the flow type of thing. It's potentially a lot of overthinking, can be potentially a lot of anxiety. But
Mm,
at the
that's a
end of the
really good
day,
point.
we have to, with Gemini, and we think about Gemini being associated with the lovers, is that we get to choose. You get to choose whether or not you're going to engage with it this way or you're going to engage with it that way. How comfortable are you with duality? How comfortable are you with uncertainty? Because the more that you accept that and kind of believe and trust in what that looks like and how it's not the end of the world necessarily, the more comfortable you're going to be within this interesting, cycle of shift.
Yeah, really good point about them all being in Jupiter sign and Jupiter being retrograde in Gemini. There definitely can be. those types of anxieties and fears coming in with the Mars Pluto at the same time, and also just like getting distracted, having too many things. So like I think how you can think about calming yourself, grounding, trying to do practices that can lessen anxieties. Overcoming
Yeah.
fears is going to be huge during this period of time coming up. Not
Yeah.
letting that stop you from doing things.
Right? Because I think that's when we step out of our power,
Hmm.
when we do go into these states of fear and anxiety. And, well, a wonderful way to get back there, especially if we're thinking about Jupiter and Gemini, Pluto and Aquarius, is through breath work, because that is helps
Hmm.
regulate nervous system is
Yeah.
through that conscious breathing. And so,
Hmm.
rather than like, engage with it, because I found this very fascinating in a book that I was reading about, what's it called? Actually, I have it right here. Electric Body, Electric Health.
Mm.
And what I thought was very interesting about this, because it's all talking about using the magnetism within and around you to rewire, recharge, and raise your voltage. She doesn't like the idea of raise your vibration because, anyways, a whole other thing. But what I found very interesting about her is like she said, she was saying that the life cycle of an emotion is, less than I don't I can't remember. It was less than like 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 40 seconds. I don't know. It's short. But what perpetuates the emotion is the emotion is essentially the magnet, right? Because we're drawing it in. And then the what perpetuates it is the mind, which is the electricity. And so we keep shocking it and sparking it. And that's when we get into this spiral of the anxiety, because we keep adding electric force to what it is that kind of we attracted in emotionally that really had a lifespan. We think about like flow with your emotions, just let it ebb and flow. Because if you don't charge it with the thought, then it is going to be gone in like 2 minutes time. But it's our choice to then charge it and keep charging it. So when I think about these water sign, this emphasis of water and how we're going to attract in that feeling energy. Well, where's our Jupiter going to go with that? So that's just something to maybe think about or not think about.
Yeah. No, that's a really good focus.
So let us carry on because we have so much here to talk
Yeah.
about. Not too long later, we have on January 6th is when Mars moves back into Cancer. So it did its quick stint in, well, not that quick, but we're back in Cancer space where we were in November. And so we're going to have some time here with that. So that will be, so whatever, you got going on in Cancer, Mars is going to be charging that up. And around the
Yeah. And
same time, we got Mercury moving into Capricorn. So, what you think, Gray?
oh yeah, just what you're so that there's with Mercury goes into Capricorn, and Mercury in Capricorn's a quick one, but this is the beginning of this big cardinal sign intensification coming in
Mm,
that really is going to dominate this whole first half of the year that we're going to be talking about. I mean, it should help maybe a little bit, getting Mars out of a whole sign opposition to Pluto. But honestly, I mean, it's coming right off of that, so we're going to be
yeah,
slowly feeling it. But they will start separating. So the Mars Pluto, as Mars retrogrades back through Cancer, won't be quite as intense as it was in this whole period.
yeah,
But
and
mm,
well, then we start to see what the thing with Mars moving back into Cancer is you start to see it form this flow with Neptune, um, and Uranus. And eventually
yeah,
Saturn here. So
yeah,
so we get past this whole Pluto business, and then we're going to start to my circles are horrible there. We're going to start
yeah.
to
But I
flow
mean,
more with
yes,
this
the
Saturn
Mars
Neptune.
retrograde trining Neptune and sextiling Uranus. So we can think about negative ways to interpret that, but that's also can be potentially really creative, especially the way a Mars retrograde, even though it can be uncomfortable, even though it can feel intense and a lot of pressure, it can really dramatically things end up happening that really dramatic changes come in that really can have a big impact in your life. If you haven't looked back before at your life and periods of Mars retrograde, it's a good thing to do because, and I do think some people are more impacted by them than others, and more some people might tend to get more of a productive change out of them. I mean, it's always just really fascinating to me when I've looked at that, like how much my life has really changed so significantly off of the Mars retrogrades, and that you're because we got Uranus, we got the Neptune Saturn coming in with this. It's really going to go with that, and with big long-term change that's connecting to all these much larger cycles we're talking about. And because this is the beginning of this huge cardinal activation, so we have Mars basically going through this, retrograde from now all the way till the end of February, and then it'll come forward again. It's around April 18th or so that Mars will come back to Leo. And so there's this whole long retrograde back and forth, and the Cancer part of your chart is going to happen here. And there could be things burnt down, and there might be things you have to let go of, and there might be things that are destroyed in some way that you're also, building and trying to, work on. But keep in mind that later in the year, we will have Jupiter come into this sign. So it's one of the interesting things
Mm.
about this year is how we have this whole Mars retrograde intensity in Cancer, and then later in the year, Jupiter in Cancer comes in, which is going to impact that area of your life and however this is configured in your chart in a much more, bringing in some life and growth. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
keep that in mind with whatever's happening here. Yeah.
It what makes me think of is like when you burn the ground, the whole idea of like burning the ground so that you can
Yeah.
make way for what is going to grow afterwards. So it's almost like you have to level some things, and you might have to level certain things that you might be a little sentimental about or have emotional attachment to, or as like these because lunar energy, Mars and lunar energy together, hence why Mars is in fall there, right? It's can be a little
Yeah,
a
that's
little
true too.
difficult.
Yeah.
But and sometimes it's like where we're so charged in this area of our life too. Like maybe there needs to be less of a charge, there needs to be less action there. It needs to be integrated and repurposed, and because sometimes it's like literal things we're doing, sometimes it's like emotions that we carry, like if we're still holding maybe certain resentments or angers around certain part of our our Cancer area. Well,
Yeah.
how do we release that tension? How do we release that destructive Mars impulse so that Jupiter can be like, "Oh, you did your homework here. Well, let me invite you into this opportunity that now you're cleared up emotionally to follow." So,
Yeah, it's a long period of Mars in Cancer, but you really do have to watch all of that. That's where that Mars in its fall comes in. That can really be the, literally like that's like the downfall of the Mars in Cancer. And so,
yeah.
not, yeah, keep not get locked into engaging in conflicts that are just gonna like really drag you down and it's not worth your time or
Don't do it.
energy.
And I think that's where like Mercury and Capricorn now can help, right? Because we're in more of a hopefully a Saturnian mind state. It's a definitely different than the Sag energy we've been dealing with for how long, with going back and forth with Jupiter and the retrograde and etc. So there'll just be a whole shift in mindset that happens here around January 8th, which will be beneficial, I think. So let us move on because we have another very big thing happening just the next day, not the next day, but close to the next day on 111. You like numerology. We
Oh,
have well, let's see. I was going to move it to 112. We have the North Node moving into Pisces, and Virgo will be the South Node. So we have a big nodal shift that happens, and we're tracking the true nodes here, or at least I am. So this is the true
okay.
node shift that happened. So definitely a different flavor than Aries Libra. That's for sure. Um,
Yeah, I think when I wrote down, I think it's January 29th that the mean node shifts. So
goes in.
sometimes there is a couple weeks like this time that where there's a little, depending on which one you use, what calculation you use. Um, but yeah, it's always interesting which one goes first. And
Yeah.
I do find that, yeah, I'm not as dogmatic about my nodal choice as some other people are, but I do look at both. I do look at the mean for sure. But yeah, something is starting to shift here with the true node changing, and we've been in these long two cycles of Venus and Mars being the lords of the nodes, and the
Yes.
eclipses happening in signs of Venus and Mars. And it's some probably fittingly for this new era of time and changing in consciousness that's coming in. We're moving into a Mercury Jupiter time, and that the importance of having a flexibility of consciousness will be truly important with this time period. And so the eclipses will happen more often. We already had one Pisces lunar eclipse, but we're getting Pisces lunar eclipses, Virgo lunar eclipses. We actually still have an Aries solar eclipse coming, but the eclipses start happening there too. And it's really going to start, I mean, that Neptune north node, Saturn north node, all this, the north node is really
Yeah.
going to get this incredible focus.
It's going to be,
Um,
yeah, all
and
the
with, yeah.
conjunctions.
And with the eclipses that are coming that are so powerful, it's also interesting with regard to Mars being in the sign of the moon. And so I don't know, there's something about that just makes it almost even the Mars and Cancer more even
Right? It just
dynamically
charges it. Yeah.
explosive. Yeah, yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, and I mean, if we want to think about just the nodes being in mutable signs, think back to 2021, 2020 even is when it moved right into Sag and Gemini when the last time we were in a but now we're kind of
hmm
reversed, right? We have South Node territory is Mercurial territory and North Node territory is Jupiterian. So I
hmm
think that's definitely a good point to bring up. It's once again another cliche, your perception is your reality. So this is invitation to start to shift in this zone. Um,
It,
and what
it, it, mm,
Oh, I
yeah.
was just going to say what I thought was interesting about the Pisces lunar eclipse that we already had right before or decently before the election. I thought it was just very like suspect a little bit only because when Trump was a not or when he was elected in 2016, the lunar eclipse before that was actually the same eclipse, but reverse nodes. So it was the same degrees that were happening that led to, I don't know. I don't know if I'm saying this right or people can picture this in
Yeah,
their mind, but
it's
I
interesting.
was like, this is a very intriguing correlation. Um, anyways,
Yeah. Well, the other thing, I think all the points you're making are really good. And then I guess the other only thing is with those being the lords of the nodes, it's interesting, the Mercury retrogrades will kind of come in, which I kind of
yes.
often think about kind of clearing things out with a Mercury retrograde and detaching from this like focus of material ambitions and going through this liminal phase in that kind of way. There's something interesting about that I think is interesting, that the South Node will be in the sign of Mercury. The
Yeah.
Jupiter quality will be very different between beginning with Jupiter in Gemini, and then Jupiter ends up being exalted.
Cancer, and then the whole
Yeah,
Jupiter
and
and
in a
Leo piece
trine to
eventually.
Pisces. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that'll be a very different experience coming in. Oh, but the
With
other thing I meant to say, sorry,
go ahead.
was with that Mars in Cancer retrograde. I mean, we'll talk about this more later, I guess, but it is just fascinating with Mars in fall, and then the fact that Saturn's eventually going to fall. Also in Aries, it's one of the sort of overviews of the year, which is, showing just some of the difficult things coming in, but yeah, just the great change at the same time, and systemic structures, just kind of falling apart likely.
Yeah, I have the recycle truck going by right now outside my house, and as you're talking about this, I'm like, okay, yeah, that checks. Some of the, but you really had me thinking, just the South Node energy and
Mm,
mercurial and how much, and I was talking about this earlier with just perception in the mind and how like we, come at life with our own picture of it, our own understanding, and how essentially it's going to be Mercury retrogrades in fire and water that are going to
hmm
determine the kind of clear out that we're
hmm
doing in the South Node space. So that could be a podcast in itself. So we'll just take that tangent and move away from it. But let's carry on because we have, we're still in Capricorn season. We got a couple, we have some
That
seasons
full
to go,
moon.
Gray. We better go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That full moon we
yeah,
should go to.
yeah, we got this full moon in Cancer around the time that is essentially the sun opposing Mars here. So let's get this full moon up.
Yeah,
So
when we
January
have these, they're
13th.
always a big deal because when these full moons line up, overlap with the Mars cycle here, because yeah, like you're saying, Mars is as close to us as Mars gets. Mars is really bright red in the sky. We're coming right into that Mars Sun opposition, and then the full moon is just really illuminating, being at that peak kind of dead center of the Mars retrograde. So
Right on the
this is
angle for Washington.
yeah, wow, that is
That's
intense.
so that's something right there. Yeah.
Yeah, it really
Anyways,
is. And
um,
that Mars, Neptune, Uranus part that we mentioned earlier is starting to come in here too. But yeah, this is just a time to I know I've done consultations talking to people about this one for different reasons. It's definitely a thing we can kind of point to of something big at this full moon here, whatever it is.
yeah, and I mean, even if you want to like, sometimes it's fun. Well, less us mundane-minded people. Sometimes it's fun to like bring it back to the cycle. And even if you think back to 2020, because there's so much pushing off of this energy, essentially these degrees are around
Hmm.
those big conjunctions that happen
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
And
And the
Mars isn't,
eclipses.
yeah, Mars isn't retrograde every day. So uh, there could be what comes to the surface and clearing out. This culmination can be very multi-layered in what needs, where we are emotionally, what we're feeling, what needs to be cut, what it is we're building. It's an intense one, for sure. But we do have, at this point, this is when Mars gets to that trine with Neptune. So even yeah, so to me it brings even more of this kind of clearing energy, and potentially compassionate energy, whether it's for ourselves or other people, where it's like, okay, well, you how much can you destroy without like being somewhat conscious of empathy in some way. And that won't be everybody's story, but just maybe in personal stories. How do we destroy and still have compassion? I guess.
Yeah, and the as you're circling that Neptune North node, I mean, and ruled by Jupiter, I think the things you're saying earlier are important, and that would certainly be the case here about just sort of your own inner landscape, whether that's through breath or keeping track of your imagination and your fears and I mean, there's something about that Pisces. It can there's all sorts of different potentials with this, but I guess it makes me think about the most positive way to work with the North Node Neptune ruled by this Jupiter is that's going to be at this point starting to slow down too. I guess that's a little bit later though. Actually, no, it's
Yeah.
not right here. But it's still very much retrograde here.
I
But
think
that important of like devotion and belief in a way and that's at the same time we're having to like let go and go through disillusion. It's like not going to this place of ultimate despair and where you're kind of incapacitating yourself or something. Yeah.
Yeah, just escaping from it.
Right.
What's really potent here for me is because so we kind of get to the Venus Mars story, right? Because two things are happening at, mid-January. We have
hmm
Venus and Saturn moving to a
hmm
conjunction, and then we have this full moon and essentially the sun moving to oppose Mars. And so we kind of have this connection. This is right when the sirens go by. All right, that's a sign, people. So we have this twofold story, especially when we think about relationships in our life and our, almost this ego sort of willpower, this, independent personal direction, and it's getting this hit of the sun of like awareness of like how we're acting, how we're being, what we're doing for ourselves versus this unifying quality of Venus and Saturn coming together, which, may solidify commitments or break commitments or etc. So there's sort of this
Yeah.
like ramping up of like the ego and the independent and the I versus how do the we and what does the long term look like and how do we gel together versus this sort of volatile force of the ego and personal desire that comes up within it.
Mm.
So, let us move on here. So we're kind of getting to the end of Capricorn season. As Venus gets closer to Saturn, she'll make that conjunction on the 18th, January 18th.
Yeah. And again, that's gonna usually significant, Venus and Saturn coming together, but
Yes.
it's unusually significant this time. And like we were saying earlier, it's not just a passing storyline, it's gonna come back. And so what's going on here, we may find ourselves revisiting some issues or storylines, later in the year in
Yeah.
March and April. Yeah.
So it's kind of like put this in your pocket for later. Whatever's going
Hmm.
on around January 18th, know that
Hmm.
there is more to be developed here. And sometimes Venus and Saturn can be a little bit depressing or grief, or you were separated from the people that we love, or you feel cut off in some way. Uh, or we're just like entertaining, feeling into what the long term looks like when it comes to romance or relationships or attraction or values. So give it a pause, give it a breath, I guess we'll say, with Jupiter there. And we'll continue on because now we're moving into Aquarius season, which we must acknowledge the fact that isn't this our first Sun Pluto conjunction in Aquarius?
Yeah. And it's definitely the first in a very long time. Actually, I think it's the first ever of
Yeah.
the inauguration,
Yes.
the presidential inauguration being having that. And so that is a certainly some type of omen of the if assuming Trump is I'm sure Trump will be inaugurated on this day and the Trump presidency will be the sun have this sun Pluto quality. I mean, it's pretty wild. And there's something about that where it's like this is a different Trump coming in here. Like when I think you said Trump 2.0
Yeah.
earlier. This is Trump coming back. He's upset about things from the past. He also
He's got a
this time
vendetta.
he's been there before. I'm assuming he knows more about what to do and coming in serious and
And he also has more power.
more
He
power.
has more power than he
Absolutely.
had last time.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's like, when you think about, I mean, his whole thing is about reform, right? And I mean, that's a big Aquarius term is the idea of like reforming structures. And it just depends on what reform looks like to you. Because a lot of times progressives will be like, yeah, this is the ideal of but the reality is reform only looks like what your vision of utopia might look like. And, my vision of utopia is going to look different than a billionaire's, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah, and
um,
I've known people that have been like, well, it seems like he's being really quiet, and I'm not completely following everything he's doing right now, but it does seem like he's like got a little bit less of the talking so much. Like there's something that you can just it's very it seems very sun. I think the Sun Pluto is very fitting with him, and he's coming in like serious business that he's going to be trying to do here. But what's interesting is you don't need to put up, but if you look at the inauguration chart, the Mars retrograde in Cancer is down pretty close to the IC. And so it's got this very, I was curious who was going to become the president because I could depending on who it was going to be, I'd imagine very different scenarios in some ways about what that Mars retrograde opposing the MC, which we could see as being like the opposing party or just like the homeland or um yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll have to see how that ends up showing up with it.
Yeah, we'll put that in our pocket for later. But that is a big moment there, folks. And so we're gonna, you're gonna get a shot of solar energy around your Pluto and Aquarius story right here
Yeah.
for the first time ever. So observe, take it in. And you know, it's the beginning of a very long era. And it will change and shift over time, but there's something about this moment around January 20th that we might get of like, oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, you're
So,
right. If
mhm,
there probably is something more coming in there. And then the other thing is I don't know if you're gonna go if you go move up to the next new moon, it's
yeah,
like here we get the Sun Pluto and then Mercury is
yeah,
moving
let's
along.
cruise.
And right before the new moon, Mercury comes in there.
Look at that party.
Yeah. Mm.
Look at that
Yes.
Mercury, Moon, Pluto party on January 28th, right in the
Yeah.
balsamic phase.
Yep.
Um, Yeah, that seems like a message. It seems like a Plutonian message. Nicholas will be shouting out the the rooftops, I'm sure. Um,
Yeah, there's definitely something here that we'll probably see some stuff in the world, but also yeah, definitely this is an important time to be you'll get a lot more information about what's going on with Pluto and Aquarius for you that whole week we're just looking at the sun going across and then Mercury going across and the lunar cycle ending there and then beginning not too far away from Pluto.
what I do like about this period of time too, right around January 25th, is we get even though
Mm.
Venus is sandwiched between Saturn and she's pretty much at the midpoint of Saturn and
Oh, right.
Neptune.
The trine.
And she's
Mm.
trining Mars retrograde.
Yeah.
So at least there's some sort of in maybe the things that I was talking about in the full moon in Cancer, and those Venus Mars separate stories. There's because they don't come together all the time. They've got their own cycle, and so this is definitely a moment of Venus and Mars working together. Maybe Mars
It,
subdued a little bit
definitely. I mean,
after after
I
Mars
think,
goes through the awakening of Uranus. Now it's like, okay, Venus, I've seen I've seen the light.
yeah, absolutely. So this will be obviously the waning moon after that real full moon of whatever that Mars is about. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential integration and working with whatever that material is. The other thing I was going to say is Venus would have already hit her. I wrote down I saw a date of January 10th for her maximum elongation as an evening star. So she's already starting to slow a little bit, and she's already gotten up
Mm,
real high. But like, it's right after this, as we come into that new moon, she's crossing over like the retrograde shadow zone, which basically just means like as we come into this new moon, it's also sort of marking this place where, in addition to that Pluto information we're talking about, Venus is at a place where she's going to come back to. So we're this as we come into this new moon, she's just passing over that degree that she's going to come back to. And so we're entering that area where, this area of like 24, 25 Pisces, she's going to come back to. And so you may end up, sometimes there does end up being, um, I think also, especially once she hits that max elongation, January 10th, we're in that window where even though she's not retrograde yet at all by any means, um, some of those Venus retrograde initial parts of the story are likely becoming up more, especially because she's already gone over Saturn. We know she's coming back. Right here, she's coming to Neptune. We know she's coming back. Um, so again, it's another part where there's like a bigger storylines opening up that we're going to be coming back
yeah,
around to. And yeah,
yeah.
it's a big new moon, really.
It is January 29th, that new moon in Aquarius. We got the Aquarius pile up, and we're going to see this as we go through these new moons, these like sort of pile up energies. But it's configured to that Jupiter retrograde, who
Hmm.
Jupiter. So Jupiter's
Jupiter
going to
is,
station direct like 5 days
yes.
after this, or
Yeah,
five,
we
six
are now.
days.
We are now in the week before Jupiter's stationing. So, but it's also it's Uranus is stationing, I think, the next day. So this
Yes.
lunation, it is in, I mean, just outside of a 13-degree orb of the new moon. The new moon's almost an orb to Uranus, but definitely squaring signs. And Uranus will be very alive at this new moon too.
At the
It's
full
gonna have
moon, it's the full moon that we're going to get the treatment, I think, right? With the
okay.
Uranus. Yeah.
Oh
Let's
yeah, the
hold let's
square.
hold the Uranus
That'll
phone
hit
for
the
a second.
square.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but Uranus stationing often will just bring in something
Absolutely.
bigger Uranian kind of revelations, and then it's also the quality of Jupiter stationing too.
Yeah. I mean, this cycle really has to me like opens the door for especially in the world of like tech, innovation, data, maybe even surveillance. Especially with this trine to Jupiter and then Uranus going about to go direct here.
It's also
But
significant that Jupiter's stationing with this new moon trining it. He is right near the degree, pretty close to the degree of Aldebaran, and Aldebaran is the nature of Jupiter and Mars. So it's not just like any degree of Gemini. That's interesting that there's a royal star there, and so
I got
that's
my
this that we're
Aldebaran
oh
on right
nice, yeah,
now.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's maybe going to be something yeah, we can definitely see that coming in here, and that could definitely go, I mean, in the world event, all sorts of things with like these different power plays and with conflicts and resources, and but it makes me think in our personal lives, yeah, there's something, it gives a little more pop to that Jupiter stationing with a trine here, and that forward momentum of Jupiter that will start coming in, that of hopefully some forward direction with whatever's going on for you here.
Yeah. Yeah, we like seed into it, and then once we seed in, a few days into the cycle, we get the forward momentum of Jupiter. So, and the forward momentum of Uranus. So this is a big moment. Plus, we got Mercury, Pluto conjunct. Like, there's a lot going on here. There's definitely a serious potential to for shifting, especially with all the mutable going on. But then this kind of like fixity of where our head's at, or like what the vision is,
Mm.
and how we then propel that forward. This is an interesting point here, like right here too. I just keep looking at this zone, just thinking about the eclipse that's going to happen like a couple years later. This is such a hot spot of the zodiac. So just keep that in mind in general, like even just what's going on at the end of January. It's like we're going to build layers and layers upon this story and this like position
Yeah, and
of the
that's all right
zodiac.
at the that's all right around the Jupiter Saturn conjunction. I was realizing I said I got carried away with Jupiter, but I think more often you will hear Venus Mars be Aldebaran. Not that, Jupiter being, though Aldebaran as a royal stars has a there is a Jupiterian type of quality though.
I
That's one
think
of
and I always feel like with fixed stars, there's some,
yeah.
not with all of them, but with some of them, there's varying views as
Oh
to what
yeah,
planetary pair. I mean, I've heard that
there definitely
Aldebaran is
is.
like straight up Mars, just like pure Mars.
Yeah,
Um,
it's got a definite Mars connection.
well, we do
Um,
got Jupiter and it's bound, so there's that.
Well, there's
Um,
also, they're not exact, but that is making me realize there is an antitia between Jupiter and Mars retrograde that's sort of coming in around this time. I guess it would,
mm,
and so we're not like that far off. So I guess that was maybe some kind of roundabout
yeah,
way I was getting into.
almost there.
There's something kind of interesting that, yeah, it's definitely not
It's
exact, but
almost it's about right here. It's the Antisha when Jupiter stations
yeah, interesting.
right here
Yeah. So that's interesting.
on the 4th
But
and
that
February
does
4th.
actually, that brings in the Mars with Aldebaran one way or another. Yeah. So
So,
that could be a pretty. That makes me think like a pretty powerful Jupiter station that that when we bring in that Antisha, that would not maybe otherwise you wouldn't notice it as much. Yeah. Stand
Well,
out
and
to you as much.
for a couple reasons. So let's back it up just a little bit for, February, beginning of February, we see this Venus Neptune North Node situation. We've already said this is a story that's going to continue,
Mm,
but the node will
right.
move on a little bit. So there's something to be said about this quality of time with Venus, Neptune, and the
Mm-hmm.
North Node together. And just Venus or no, Neptune in the North Node. Like this is a very complicated setup. That I feel
Mm.
like could totally be a podcast on its own. But
Oh yeah. It
yeah,
definitely could
I'm
be.
like, this is a wormhole that we can choose to go down or not.
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, I think for time today we have to kind of
we have to
move on,
pass it
but
on, but
it's definitely a time to really pay attention to. And we've had a number of these Venus and Neptune conjunctions. I can't remember now how many it's been, but this is actually the end of it. We'll have this one, and then there's one more when she comes retrograde back across Neptune
mm,
later on, and then
yeah,
that's it. We've been having them since I can't remember if we had one in 2011 or not, but like since 2012 for
12.
sure. In that time period, we've been having them pretty much every year. They've just been it's been a really I've thought about how in fact I wrote an article on my website a long time ago at this point about them just because I was thinking about this is it's actually we're in a unique time. You have to just live through a Neptune cycle and Pisces in your lifetime to get this that we where we have them happening. And so this one, of course, is the most um extreme Venus
Extreme
Neptune that
moon
we've
there
ever
too.
gone. They're really
Yeah.
close to her exaltation degree. They're within a degree of her exaltation degree. They're on the North Node. Saturn's there. I mean, it's and so all the Saturn Neptune themes we've already been talking about is just way more amped up. It's very relational. And remember, this is before she goes retrograde. So, um,
Oh my gosh, look at this night
there's
sky, Gray.
Venus
Oh,
Neptune can stir up a lot of like romance and imagination. But
yeah.
remember, she's going to retrograde in Aries. She's going to come back. She's going to come forward again. So like this is only one part, first installment of a
Yeah.
bigger
So if
story.
you
Yeah.
fall under a love spell
Yeah.
in the cauldron, if the cauldron's cooking up a love spell for you, hold on. Hold on.
Yeah.
Venus is gonna go into Aries. She's got things, she's other things are going on. So we gotta, we have to temper our rose-colored glasses at this particular moment in time. But we can also learn from, I mean, it's gonna be a incredibly creative period too. Like, who knows? Maybe you'll have like a creative inspiration that happens that will be the thing that you then, your project that you go into and then it turns out to be your legacy. Like I'm really just spitballing here, but you don't know. Like this could be a
I
very
I
destined moment of creativity that is like,
I really
wow.
think that's something to be thinking about this whole year. And I'm glad you said that. Yeah. I'm not I think you definitely could be getting involved in something that really is developing and working. I think the more everyone can just get involved, following your passion and whatever artistic creative process you're engaging in, I think there's really significant work that can come out of this.
Yeah. And I
Definitely,
think those
absolutely.
Mercury retrogrades will help in fire and water too. So yeah, so these are great
And this
themes to
is that
latch on to.
that waxing moon, so it's definitely got this like new moon.
Yeah,
It's
like
got it's
whoo.
really got that behind it when we have this conjunction. Yeah,
So be sure to go outside on February 1st, when the sun sets, because we'll see very low in the sky here.
yeah,
We'll
yeah.
see this beautiful crescent with Venus,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and well, in Neptune if you have
And
superpower eyes.
she'll be bright too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a beautiful day. So, all right, let us carry on. And that's the thing with this threshold, right? We got Jupiter that is stationing direct on the 4th of February.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, look who's in Aries, Venus.
Yeah.
So here we have two things going on. And we have the Antisha we talked about. We have Jupiter stationing. Uranus is just, stationed not too
Just
long ago.
gestations. Yeah.
And then we have a Taurus moon ruled by Venus who just went into Aries, which will be big because, right, she's stationing retrograde here. So Holy Aries. We get a we get a burst of Venusian Aries flavor. Um, so that's going to be a big
Yeah.
shift here, and so we're just going to have to put that in our pocket and carry on. Uh,
But yeah,
because
in general, February, I mean, there's so many
yeah,
big months of shifts, but this is a month where we do get, we have retrogrades coming almost immediately following them. But
yes,
here we get Jupiter goes direct at the beginning of the month, and a few weeks later, February 23rd, Mars goes direct. So
yeah,
February has this point where, yeah, both Jupiter and Mars to go direct. It is interesting they have that in Tisha when Jupiter's going direct,
yeah.
honestly.
You're gonna and
Yeah,
and we
you
also
got the
have
full moon. Oh yeah, the
we have
superior.
that
Yeah.
Mercury Cazimi
Mm,
on the February 9th, same around the
yep.
same time that the North Node Neptune perfects. Um, oh, that's right on my
Yeah, and so
IC. Look
there
at
is
that. Okay.
this is yeah, it's great you stopped there because yeah, we see that we have this waxing moon going across Mars retrograde, but Mercury is being reanimated and there's some sort of then these Mercury cycles starting here again. It's a liminal for sure. It's squaring Uranus, and then if yeah, as we get to the full moon, we'll see the full moon's squaring Uranus. But right before the full moon squaring Uranus, we get Mercury starting a new cycle squaring Uranus
Yeah, this is
with
a
Jupiter
very
stationing direct. This is a yeah.
uh-huh. This is a
There's a
moment.
lot going on. Yeah.
This is a
Now,
moment.
for example, when we were talking about politics again, whatever's going on with the Trump administration, they're rolling here, right? But you want to keep your eye on your own life and what you're developing and whatever you're doing.
This
And
feels like a very organizing moment. Like when we talk about like people getting together and like
yeah,
banding together, especially with Neptune North Node, the Aquarius
absolutely.
Cazimi, yeah, and
And
Moon on Mars,
And I think
you
there
know.
really will be a lot of that because that's what when I was bringing up an inauguration chart that Mars retrograde near the IC, I think there is
Mm,
going to be a lot of organized resistance to what's
what's going
happening with the
on?
U.S. presidency, and yes, certainly this is a little cycle here that we would
Yeah.
could see some significant stuff happening. Hmm.
And we just have to keep in mind with Neptune North Node, like this could be very like subterfuge kind of like there's a lot of things going on that we're not going to be able to see.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely, yeah.
there's so much to this. Like something could be announced, but there could be so much more to it. So just keep that in mind. Like it's really just hard to know. So let us carry on over to so basically we have our full moon there on February 12th, and we, perfectly configured to Uranus pretty much with
Yeah.
Mercury there. So yeah, this whole cycle is a very interesting one from late January through February 12th. Like this is a very active period. Which makes sense. I mean, especially when we think about politics, it's like this is when someone gets into office and everything starts to happen, right? It's like, oh, executive order here, this happens here, that happens there. So we are going to get that. That is going to
Yeah.
be for real a thing going on.
Oh, definitely. But then also, yeah, very Uranian full moon, Uranus stationed a couple weeks ago. Also, though, if you remember the full moon, like November 15th or so, was conjoining Uranus. And so there's something about that full moon in mid-November of 2024 that was on Uranus, and then this one coming later. Um, it's another full moon with Uranus. There might even be a connection back to that one before that you notice something. But yeah, I mean
Yeah.
there's a big now we're not quite to Mars stationing direct yet, but there is something quite powerful about a little bit a week before that's a Jupiter going direct, then this
Yeah.
Uranus full moon, and then I saw around the 23rd or so that Mars finally stations. So there it's the February just has a real dynamism to it.
It does, and that's the thing that's so crazy about 2025 is like like I'm looking at February and I'm like, wow, look at that, look at that, look at
Mm.
that. And then I'm looking at this month and I'm like, wow, look at that, look at that. There's so much that's happening. But that whole
Not,
Mars,
but even though other years we might be like, well, this is like a extreme. This is a big month. It gets so way more chaotic in March that even
Yeah.
though we're talking about full moon squaring Uranus, there's actually a lot more coherence in some ways
I know, right?
with what's happening here. So it's again a time where like you can sort of like we had last year, earlier in 2024, like that start of the year is a nice time to really be bring in stuff, get some momentum going. But just keeping in mind in this case that, this year in 2024, we came into this really intense eclipse season in March and April. And we are again in March this month, but it's way more than just this eclipse. It's got this
Yeah, exactly.
much bigger. So
Yeah.
we're really it's an interesting thing because it's there we're on this is very dynamic, but it's a lot of dynamic quality that is like we are on the precipice of this threshold into much more about to come in the next month. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a crest where it's like this is the dynamic moment. It's like a shock. It's like a pre-shock or like there's just
Hmm.
something that like or dislodges here that then
Hmm.
unravels a whole other story. And we do have to pay attention to these hard aspect moons with Uranus and Taurus because we don't have too many more of them. So there
Mm-mm.
are these are ending stories in this fixed zone. So let's carry on because we still have
Yeah.
so much to talk about here. We've got Mercury moving into Pisces on Valentine's Day,
Yeah.
just a little hit of Pisces going on there. Although Venus will be in Aries, so I don't know about that, and Mars retrograde, but I don't know what the
Yeah.
flavor.
We'll have a extended Mercury and Pisces time coming up. So it'll be a long, Mercury will go into Aries for a bit, but then we'll end up coming back.
Yeah. We'll be
So
mirroring Venus's moves almost to some extent. Not entirely, but a bit. There, Venus and Mercury going to talk during this retrograde, which we'll see here in a bit.
I
But
like the airy quality though of Mercury in the air sign starting the cycle, and then there is
mm,
something here where this early Pisces, Mercury's in fall in the opposite sign and also still combust. So
yeah.
there's this sort of like
Oh, Mercury.
there's something not totally clear. Mercury hasn't become visible yet with whatever is starting to gestate here in that way.
Which, right as you're saying that, I'm looking and I'm seeing this moon in Virgo about to cross the South Node, right? For
Yeah.
um
I remember we
I don't
got,
know if
and
it's the first time, but
yeah, and there's something to essential dignity with transits, and we've got at this point we've got Mars in fall, Mercury in fall, Venus in detriment, the opposite sign. Same with Jupiter. So like there's Saturn's peregrine. There's suns in detriment. I mean it's like
yeah,
everything
not a
is
lot of dignity going on here.
no. It's like it's the opposite. So that is something else. I mean there's something. But it does again make me think about how, doing something different,
Yeah.
countercultural things. Yeah, but the planets they're all kind of in wild card places. Like none the planets are not in like their own signs. So it's not something like normal Venus, normal Mercury, normal Mars, normal, you know what I mean? They're
It's
all
kind of like
in
nothing's
wild
gonna
places.
stick. Like
Yeah.
that's, like you can throw how much at the wall, but like prepare for there to be, curveballs or this coming there, or like it doesn't there, or
Hmm.
there's this influence, or now this person has a say, like there's just there's a very complex combination of voices
Hmm.
happening. So that's kind of interesting, especially since we've had so many years that it seems like that the first part of the year has had this sort of momentum where like all planets are direct, and we kind of get this period of like, oh, we got a couple months and everybody things moving forward. Well, not this year. We've got like a soup of retrogrades. We've got, like this
Yeah.
yeah. So that's something to
It is
think
something
about.
where, like, yeah, when you're saying nothing's going to stick, yeah, I mean, there's just an continuing process of change happening where
Yeah.
we can't really rely on things staying the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the sun goes into Pisces. I'm not
Sun
sure
goes
if
into
there's
Pisces, February 18th-ish, around
yeah, and
there
then
somewhere.
not long after that, Mercury squares Jupiter, which is significant because you know they're um in each other's signs. But that's right around the time. The really significant thing, though, is right around there on a couple few days after that, Mars is
Dun
stationing
dun
direct on the
dun.
23rd.
Look at
Yeah.
that.
So that's the really big deal. Yeah.
And then the right as it stations, the moon's opposing it.
Yeah.
That's fun. Yeah, so we get a shot of Mars emerging with the Capricorn moon being like, ruling it. So that's an interesting little side
Now,
note
what's
here.
also interesting here, I think, is especially once Mars is stationing, is we're getting cl around the time where Mercury would actually be entering visibility, and Mercury's coming into visibility more. I'm not sure, it will probably depend on your location, what day that is, but as essentially Mercury's moving away from Jupiter into the Saturn Neptune North Node situation, and that's all happening like as Mars goes direct. So, it's an interesting thing where normally, and there will be this push forward with Mars stationing direct. Unfortunately, there are numerous examples of in world history of like Mars going direct and then escalation of warfare following that.
Yeah.
Like Germany invading Poland. I think the U.S. Gulf War was somewhere around that range. There's other ones. It's something that we will see. It's not like Mars is retrograde and everything's amplified
No.
Mars and then it goes direct and then it's everything's good. It actually can like be like building pressure and it's like a release of Mars.
Well, it's because
Uh,
the whole time Mars is retrograde, it's everybody's getting together to plan their next move. And so the big
right.
move happens when Mars emerges. And especially when we have obviously the Mars Pluto action going on and the Neptune North Node zone. So, once again, kind of what we were talking about earlier is just like this behind the scenes, you don't know what's going like there's much bigger pieces. When we think about invasions, like that's a very
Hmm.
Neptunian thing. Especially Mars and Cancer, we think about Cancer being a country. And
Mm.
yeah, so there could be this push there. And yeah, and so we got
Yeah,
that
this new moon in
Pisces new
Pisces is
moon,
big. Yeah,
February
definitely.
27th, 9
Right.
degrees.
So this is fascinating because it's right in between the two stationing. So, you know, Mars stations on the 23rd and then like March 1st, basically like right after this. I mean, Venus, she's already essentially stationing right here. She's not officially stationed retrograde right here, but she is
She's close.
stationing. Yeah, and so we have this handoff between the Mars retrograde in Cancer almost within a week, shifting into Venus goes retrograde in Aries, and then we have the new moon in Pisces that's with
Squaring
Mercury, kind of like
Jupiter.
yes, they're squaring Jupiter. They're going right all there. It's a very strong connection of that balsamic Saturn Neptune that we were talking about earlier, and so we can and you know at this point Saturn's within 8 degrees of Neptune. It's getting a little closer.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real this lunar cycle really kicks us much deeper into the Saturn Neptune disillusion. Yeah, and you're saying the square to Jupiter at the same time. Um, Very
And
much
what's
so.
important to remember here is this is the opening cycle that's leading us to the eclipse, right? Because
Right.
this is the new moon that we seed into, that is going to yeah, that we're culminating an eclipse, a big eclipse. So
So in
uh
I remember when I was researching it, it wasn't actually at an eclipse, but when the Boston Tea Party happened, which is this event that is held up as, you know, being this great sign in American history of the coming American Revolution. That was a time of, it was the opposite, though, it was Virgo, but that was a time where there was the North Node, in that case, North Node in Virgo, Neptune in Virgo, Saturn in Virgo. But we had a thing like this um, going on in that time period. I think if I remember right, the sun was in Sag, so kind of squaring them when the Boston Tea Party happened, as opposed to like this all being going into it. But when we're talking about these big Neptune, Saturn periods of dissolution, and but perhaps there could be, if there when we were talking about before about people organizing movements, there could be really big momentum starting to gain
Yeah.
some traction behind certain movements that are wanting to take activism towards certain things, or the protests or anything else. What often drives the Saturn Neptune revolutions is economic uncertainty. Um, I wouldn't really be expecting that as much here as until they hit those Aries combinations together, but there could be all sorts of factors going on with that here. And again, Saturn Neptune periods, we have to guard against getting too fearful and just depressed or disillusioned, trying to really actively create community and joy and be creative with our lives. Um, Watch out for people that are, being fundamentalists in one way or another, or scapegoating, or doing like witch hunts in one form or another, that more difficult side of the Saturn Neptunes we see sometimes. I mean, it's a big mix of things that we're just starting to get into here.
I know. I feel like we're in
But
a
it's
whirlpool right here.
yeah, yeah.
We're going down
We're
the
really,
drain. And
yeah, you're right. This is like the Pisces entering into it for sure.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
Venus goes retrograde like right after this. So, it's got that quality of like, and we're talking about protests, and
Well, yeah.
Venus retrograde
So
will go will
yeah.
go with
Mm-hmm.
protests and people getting upset about things, especially in Aries. That can be a a thing. I mean, Venus is in the sign of Mars. Mars just went direct, so that force of Mars going forward is like kind of locked into like Venus going retrograde. So there can be real counter movements and protests and
Yeah.
discord and all kinds of stuff starting to
Yeah,
appear.
Venus will stir some things up, right? I mean,
Hmm.
she goes retrograde on the 1st of
Hmm.
March. You see the moon configured to her right there. And essentially she's in a sextile with Jupiter, even though it doesn't perfect, but it is something
Hmm.
to think about because, she does have, a concept or an ideal or a belief, that she wants to express, and she's going to go back into Jupiter's sign here shortly. So the whole like out there and, displaying what it is that you're fighting for and
Hmm.
organizing of, especially when we think about like the whole like the George Floyd protests and when we had that Venus in retrograde in Gemini.
In Gemini,
Gemini
yeah.
is very let me tell you about it. So Venus, I think, will be a big, yeah, some things are going to be absolutely stirring at this point. At the
And
same time, we got Mercury on the North Node can join with Neptune. So that whole thing is perfecting on the
mhm.
1st of March.
The way that's
Sun
like a
squaring
refer
Jupiter, you know.
yeah, Sun squaring Jupiter is big. The way there's like a reformation though, in terms of like Venus, like she doesn't actually complete the aspect with Jupiter and
Yeah.
pulls away. It almost makes me think too with something with a Venus story. It could be like, oh, you think something is there to like come in that doesn't quite do it fully. But then there's a whole retrograde process that's going to come in that you just have to kind of go through about whatever that is, and there's going to be a new rebirth and coming in,
Yes. So let's carry on here in the interest of our time. We still got a lot to
yeah.
get through.
So this
We
is a
got
big one. Mercury goes into
Yeah.
Aries. Yeah,
Mercury and Aries, because Mercury's going to retrograde here,
yeah.
and it's going to cross over Venus here. And so also things will get a lot louder. We also got to think about this Aries threshold as all these planets go over it. We're precursing for Saturn Neptune piece here.
Absolutely.
So Mercury dances over this spot. And really, next thing I have kind of on my list is actually when Mercury and Venus meet
Yeah, that's like
on March 11th.
one thing just to bring up. I'm sure a lot of people listening already know this, but there is also, we haven't mentioned the whole Venus star and the cyclical nature, and so there are these 8-year and 4-year increments of like Venus being reborn in a certain sign. So those Venus retrogrades, if you think about March of 2017, 2009, 2001, 1993. that is a way to it's always a helpful thing to think about, how have you been impacted by these Venus retrogrades in the past? And certainly whatever's going on with this one, this is a really important time here on March 11th because of Mercury and Venus coming together. And then, this is right before Mercury then goes retrograde also.
Yeah, there's definitely something that is shared, expressed, proclaimed.
I mean, it's
That
just like 3 days later, right? Around March
yeah,
14th.
so let's see here. So Mercury, yeah, so March 15th, 14th, 15th,
Yeah.
14th exactly. I got
Yeah.
it here.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I mean, essentially Mercury is retrograding, I mean, 1 degree off of where Venus retrograded,
Yeah.
and Mercury's retrograding at the solar eclipse degree. So that's important to
Mm.
remember too, is that we're about to have a solar eclipse in this zone. Right. And I mean, we, speaking of eclipse, we just passed over the eclipse, but we'll head back there real quick.
Oh,
But,
did you? Oh, sorry.
yeah,
I, I wasn't, we got caught up in the Venus
we
Mercury
got
thing.
caught
Yeah.
up in the other story. But that,
Yeah.
I mean, at this lunar eclipse in Virgo, that is when Mercury is about to station on the solar eclipse degree, is just talked to Venus.
Well, there's a lot with that because it's so there's that. This is such a low, I mean, for obviously reasons, if you
This is
look, there's a
loaded.
Sun Saturn conjunction just happened. Saturn just was like dying and being reborn, and they're all at the North Node, amping up the
It's
Saturn
so much.
Neptune and its opposite. And like you're saying, Venus and Mercury have been over where there's next eclipse, where the lunar eclipse
Oh, Gray, you're breaking up. Oh,
eclipse comes in, and at the Aries ingress,
Gray,
Saturn.
the audio broke up like the whole time you were talking. You were roboting during that. So I don't know. I don't think we caught that, what you were just talking about, just FYI. Oh, can you hear me? Oh, I don't hear you. Do you hear me? Like, are you muted? Maybe jiggle the cords. Um, oh, oh, yeah, it's something's going on there. Uh, oh, no, I'm gonna have to let me pause. Let me pause. All right, we're back. We had some technical difficulties. We had to fix Gray's mic. I had a military plane go over and someone's cutting a tree outside. So, we are recording this while Leo moon is flowing with the Mercury Jupiter opposition. So yeah. But okay, so Gray, we were talking about, which is actually really funny because we were talking about the lunar eclipse in Virgo and
Yeah.
like how massive it was with the Sun Saturn conjunction, Mercury about to station, uh, North Node Neptune, et cetera, et cetera. And you went on a whole thing, and I didn't hear any of it.
Yeah, so it was well, on one hand, you said Sun Saturn, right? So one thing that's interesting is where we just had like this death and like rebirth of Saturn's. This is whole new Saturn cycle just barely starting. Saturn's combust right here. The North Node and Neptune are all, Saturn and Neptune are getting closer. The eclipse is obviously setting them off. But then, as you just mentioned, there's interesting other connections with Venus and Mercury both stationing in Aries, where the next Aries solar eclipse will be. That was one thing you brought up earlier. That's active here. But then there's also these degrees of where the lunar eclipse is located, is where Venus comes back to station direct later
Yeah.
at like 24 Pisces. That's very close to where this eclipse is happening. And then at the Aries ingress, Saturn is also kind of like at 24 Pisces. That's the Aries ingress is like less than a week later. But especially, yeah, the thing you brought up about the solar eclipse and Mercury and Venus stationing there, I just think is interesting just because of Venus will also come back to this degree. So like this like 23 Pisces to like maybe we should extend a 22 Pisces to like 10 Aries zone is just like lit up
Yeah. It's like a swap
with
going on
this.
almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's I mean, and it's interesting to think about like whenever there's a some prominent lunation in Virgo, I always think about I think I was talking about this earlier when we were talking about the Capricorn ingress. There's like the pieces of our reality puzzle start to move around. Like there are it's tangible change that happens during prominent Virgo lunations. And here we have it configured to the south node. We have this Saturn component, like this Neptune dissolution. We've got, there's just so much going on, and especially Mercury ruling it, who's about to
Yeah.
station on the solar
Yeah.
eclipse.
So when we talked before about the South Node connection to Mercury going retrograde, this is like the
This is a
I don't
moment.
know.
This is it.
This is the ultimate example. But yeah, because Mercury
Yeah.
is literally stationing as we get the South Node eclipse,
So,
and Venus is already retrograde. So
yeah, it's great. It makes me wonder what's going to happen here. Like, what hyper accelerates here that leads us to the last Aries solar eclipse? You know what I mean? Like, because this is like, to me, this is like breaking down components that's going to lead into something that is this like strong burst of an initiatory and like the final chapter of like so much Aries. My God, so much Aries.
yeah. When
Um,
you mentioned before, like how I did those talks on Saturn Pisces before, and it's true. I have really focused the past few years really looking at the Saturn Neptune cycle. This is actually honestly, this is like one of the moments I've always been the most curious about what would be happening. Because we are before this is before the actual Saturn Neptune conjunction. This is sort of like the ultimate balsamic dissolution of their cycle before they start getting closer together. I mean, there's actually going to be there will be more eclipses coming before they come together, but this one has just always really stood out to me with them all lined up with the North Node, yeah, and the Venus retrograde and the Mercury retrograde. So it's just really extreme. And there is something there is like there often with these South Node lunar eclipse like this, there is because we have that stuff over on the North Node. There can be that combination of something is coming in with like desires and material ambitions and things, but then something is simultaneously being like let go or released. Um, it's somehow it's got this very intense, there's even I hadn't looked at this, noticed this, maybe I noticed it before, but I didn't notice it to myself, but I'm noticing it now, is there's more Antisha happening here with Venus is not too far off one
oh, for the
with the
Sun,
lunar
Saturn.
eclipse. Yeah, yeah, Venus is contra Antisha the Sun, Saturn,
Yeah.
and Antisha the eclipsed moon. So that it does really, even just thinking about that and how that focalizes, just say like the Venus Sun contra Antisha is focalized on that zero Aries point where everything is hitting.
Yeah.
It's there's this is yeah, it's a really big moment. And again, it's one part of a much bigger story. And I'm not sure what else to say about it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
trining Uranus too. I
I
mean, there's so
know.
many things
It's
going on with it. It's
yeah.
there's big collective events happening, but I do think this is a time period where you can certainly be planning to do stuff and be working on things during this time, but if you have big projects and things that are going to be developing during this time, this is a particular day I would be trying to personally take it easy if you can. That being said, sometimes we have to show up and perform and do something big at a high level during one of these moments, and it ends up changing somebody's life in a good way. So you can never, it's definitely chaotic in world events, but it's also very creative, and it's a big moment of the year for sure. I don't, yeah.
Yeah, I would just say take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath,
That's
ground
what I should have
yourself,
said. Take a deep breath. Yeah.
ground yourself down,
Hmm.
you know? And
It's really igniting the fact that I mean Venus at this point it's almost been 2 weeks, basically 2 weeks that she's been retrograde, and Mercury's just about going to retrograde, but there's like
mm,
so much more of that process coming, right? Like we're just starting to deepen into that. So it makes this particular Venus combination with Mercury retrograde. It's just so powerful the way it ends up connecting into the Saturn Neptune. And it's one of the reasons why I really think there are things coming that we can't totally know of right now. There could be huge movements building during this time in your personal life. Things could be changing in really dramatic ways, all
yeah.
across this time. Yeah.
Yeah, because really just the whole waning cycle of this to lead to the solar eclipse, we just have the sun, obviously we get into the Mercury retrograde
Hmm.
cycle. We have the sun on
Yep.
the North Node, which obviously is going to be a big moment. Sun with Neptune. Like
Hmm.
there's a lot of precursor energy. And that's kind of what you just said about like feeling into what it is we don't know, but we feel things shifting. And, maybe you hear of a job opportunity, but maybe it's like how many months away, or like you put something in and you're not going to know for some time, or there's just this level of once again being in this two places at once where it's like embrace the in between, but it can feel very powerful because like there's no going back. There's like there's like big shifts. And then your body could just feel weird, right? When we think about North Node, Sun, Neptune together, like the sense of vitality can almost feel like you're in another, uh, you know, plane of existence. You're like, what is this? What am I feeling? Why do I feel woozy or weird? Or, some people might even have vertigo. Like it can just be a moment where things feel very grounded, or not grounded, unstable, and but like almost like a dream, the sense of like living in a dream at the moment.
It,
um
it's like, and I do like to use the word
Lucidity.
liminal, but yeah, it's true. And this is like just the ultimate to me. I mean, it's really just extraordinary. Because I don't know if you want to show the Aries ingress chart then, but
Yeah,
keeping in
let's
mind
get
that, yeah,
in.
we are literally we're in between eclipses. We get the Sun Neptune conjunction at the final degree of Neptune. So the Aries ingress chart has the Sun Neptune. I mean, we'll start having, like we saw that Sun Pluto inauguration for Trump. We'll end up having these Sun Neptune ingress charts that he or whatever world leader you have in your country, that they'll have. This is like they're almost conjunct, but they're within half a degree. But
Yeah.
the Sun just getting out of that Neptune conjunction. But yeah, I mean, Pluto's close to the ascendant. Pluto ends up being even closer to the ascendant, I believe, at the Cancer ingress.
Mm.
Um,
Uranus on the IC.
this combination will be different. Yeah, Uranus on the IC. Yeah, exactly. So there is in the US, when we look at this, we can see the MC Scorpio, Mars and fall in the six. Um, that doesn't look good for the leader,
I know.
and Uranus on the IC. So that's one of the reasons why, like whoever the president was, I was thinking could be a lot of resistance and
Distance too. Yeah.
movements, and
Well, especially that loud
but we'll
moon
see
and
what
Sag,
happens.
trining Venus
Yeah,
and Mercury in the
there's
11th,
something really interesting about the people. Yeah, the people moving
the people
between
are speaking.
these two retrograde planets.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Pluto also separating from Pluto on that ascendant, but also sextile the ascendant. But yeah, I mean, this Aries ingress chart, if you're somewhere else, it'll obviously be set up a little bit differently, but everybody's going to have that moon and Sag applying to be opposite Jupiter, but then more closely moving in between the retrograde Venus and Mercury. So it seems to speak to it's all these, I think the potential, we'd always be thinking there's potential for movements and things coming in. And I really think this Aries ingress chart will be showing that, and it'll be showing up in different locations in different ways. But just that alone, I feel like we'll
Yeah.
go with it. Yeah.
And it's going to stick. I mean, at least here in the US, right? We got a fixed ascendant. So this is kind of
Yep.
locked in for the year. Um, yeah, so it'll be intriguing to see this, especially Venus sextiling Pluto in it too. And like I feel like there's more of sort of this power to the people uh vibe going on. I mean, it's hard to say. Like the thing that we're beating home in this podcast is we don't know what's going to happen, and we're not here to tell you and pretend like we think we know. It's kind of like 2020 all over again, in the sense that something's big, but what is it? It's
Yeah,
you know, we can
but this
only
is not the same as, again,
no, it's not the same at all.
the
But
2020 ingress what looked very concerning with the way Mars came into it with everything, and we see Mars involved, but not in the same way the 2020 Aries ingress
no.
had it. And
Not
yeah, so
exalted. Now we're fallen. Like there's like
yeah,
so yeah.
so yeah, but yeah, and then so this Aries ingress, it's huge because we're heading right into yeah, it makes me think like on with Venus and Mercury, we're just they're in the underworld, that there is this very liminal death, I mean, so much symbolism around that of something
Yeah,
ending,
that's
this
true.
this change. I mean, the fact that we keep talking about, this is also right before the first of all the big movements happens with like, Neptune's about to go into
Neptune's
Aries.
on the edge. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of there's something about this that to me really goes with sort of like this death of the way things have been. We're crossing into this like threshold of this whole new quality of like this different era coming in. There's something about that which just, yeah, really picks up to me.
Yeah. So here we are in Aries season, and we kind of get started with a very interesting chart. I'm definitely excited kind of to see how this is going to play out. Like there's some hope for me, I think, in this chart. I feel like it doesn't feel like damning. It feels like exciting. And yeah, so there's a lot that happens first thing, right? Because like you said, we have this rebirth moment that's about to happen for both Venus and Mercury, who are both retrograde. So on the 22nd, we have is it the 22nd? That's what I
Yeah,
have.
it's a 22nd. Yep.
Yeah. Oh,
Venus,
she's moving
Venus.
fast. That's why.
Yep.
So 22nd, we have the Venus inferior Cazimi, and then on the 24th, we have
Mhm.
the Mercury inferior Cazimi. So it's like bam, bam, Venus, Mercury, rebirth
Yeah.
into the sun, and starting that that more prominent phase, right? They're getting out of that evening star energy and into the more hot activated nature too. I mean, they're still in the underworld, sure, but there's that shift going on.
No, yeah, they're in the underworld, but they're definitely like reanimated. And it's always an interesting one because of reception that, they're in the sun's exaltation. It's an interesting theory about that. I know I've heard Ryan Butler, it just jumped into my mind as I was saying that as somebody I've heard talk about that before. But similar to like Leo, it's just one where, when the planets are hitting the Cazimi, they're in the sun, so they're being received by the sun. So in an exaltation way. But of course, Mars is in fall in Cancer at the same time as a domicile lord. But yeah, there's something about that that's really interesting. And then there is, of course, a soft sextile to Pluto and Aquarius, which I know it's like
Yes.
like the biggest thing in the world, but I mean, it's
A
still a
soft
sextile.
sextile. That's
Well, it's
that's
just, it's something. And then the fact
well,
that
Venus and
there is
Aquarius, I
this
think.
there is
I
this
sorry.
charge to like this new Pluto and Aquarius era, and the fact that they are in a sextile to
No,
Pluto,
I don't think
I
it's
think is
soft.
significant. Yeah, it's not soft. Yeah,
I don't
it's
think
a
it's soft.
real
I think that's why I was making fun of it, because I was like,
okay. Yeah.
soft? I don't think so. I feel like this is actually pretty potent. This is
It's
definitely
a
an
potent,
opportunity. Yeah.
it's a scintillating sextile.
Yes, there we go.
Okay.
Yes. So we're gonna get some of that Pluto action. The whole Mars squaring Chiron thing is very interesting at this time too. Just the
Yeah,
fact
that's
that
true.
there's when I think about like, if people are like rising up and like, proclaiming like where they're having, maybe survival issues or like, certain wounds or traumas or like just that chironic nature. It's really pushing home what is, uh, it's almost like it's bringing forth like the poison. Like it's like, look at what is like poisonous and horrible about all this. It's like, don't you care? Like that's what I kind of get this whole Mars energy and Cancer is like,
Yeah.
don't you care? Like wake up. Um, you know. So
Yeah.
maybe
I
I'm just
mean,
getting excited about that,
it
but
and it is also the U.S. Chiron return. And the
yeah.
last time there was a U.S. Chiron, I mean, the exact Chiron return, the Sibley chart was like right after the election. But the last time we had a Chiron return lined up in part with some of the events in the Watergate scandal, which, kind of was a poison. I was before I was born, but I always heard about it growing up and just the poison of the disillusionment people had in the presidency and the wiretapping, which of course is like mm, almost laughable now, the amount of information
Oh,
that's on
right.
and
Yeah.
the surveillance. But
I know.
it's an interesting connection because that is literally a massive issue now is all this surveillance and collection of data. And the last time there was a Chiron return was like Watergate. But yeah, I mean,
All right. Great. We're gonna
I
move
think,
through this.
yeah, keep going.
We're gonna
Sure.
we're gonna move. Speaking of Watergate, we got
Yeah.
Venus and Mercury moving back into
Yeah.
Pisces here. So we get our second Venus Neptune conjunction around March 28th, March 27th to be exact, but March 28th too. And then the next day we have March 29th, we have the solar eclipse, right? So let's pause on this right quick. So
Yeah. So
solar
that's obviously a
eclipse,
big
9
event.
degrees. Yeah.
And yeah, like you mentioned, that's right where Mercury and Venus have gone retrograde. This is right at that final Venus conjunction with Neptune and Pisces that we're going to have. Venus has come
Yeah.
back to the mutable sign. And then Mercury's like right at that zero Aries point where everything's going. So I think Mercury actually goes back into Pisces. Does it? I can't remember now. I think Mercury
Oh
might
yeah.
get back into Pisces to conjoin
Yeah,
Neptune
Mercury goes
before
back into Pisces,
Neptune
conjuncts
comes into
Neptune.
Aries. But yeah, it's interesting though. But it's interesting because even though that technically that's what happened, it's very much seeming like Mercury's psychopomp, Mercury retrograde, ushering Neptune across that Aries point, and that all happens like right after, I mean, very closely after this eclipse. It's the final Aries eclipse. Another really big point of change, and again, how these cardinal signs are getting so activated. And I mean, it's just incredible that there's another big Aries event, an eclipse right before Neptune comes into Aries. So like the Aries parts of our chart just has so much already going on. They're so volatilized with Neptune about to enter the sign, and that's just a huge change, the Neptune in Aries.
All right, great. We've been talking so long that I have to put my AirPods died. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
sorry. I talked
So
too long at the beginning.
we did. We went, well, it's okay. So we're gonna have to kind of speed up through this whole zone.
Yeah.
Um which is a shame because look at this solar eclipse. There's just so much going on to it. Um but I feel like at this point we've kind of like outlined some of the stories that we feel
Oh
like are
yeah.
really happening now. So we might just maybe want to go through like sort of highlight moments to think about quality of time.
I think we could
Um
talk a little bit more about Neptune in Aries and that
yes,
part, and
I
then
would like to do
Saturn in
that.
Aries when that happens.
So yeah, let's cruise on because basically, like what, two days after the eclipse, we have Neptune move into Aries here. Not even 2 days, the day after, March 30th. So new frontier, obviously. We've talked a lot about Neptune in Aries, but I mean, you can't deny the fact that we have a Aries solar eclipse and then all of a sudden, bam, Neptune's here. So uh yeah. What is there anything in particular you'd like to share about like just Neptune and Aries in this moment or as a general quality?
Well, some of our listeners are probably born with Neptune and Sagittarius, so there is that. Like you and I have that. There is that just thinking about what's it like to have Neptune be in a fire sign. We haven't had one of those in a while. And this is not just any fire sign. This is Aries, the exaltation of the sun, the home of Mars, and this is Neptune like on that Aries point. Um, and so there's a lot to say. I mean, you could always have a whole podcast just about this.
And there probably will
Um,
be one.
yeah. But things that it definitely in some ways makes me think about the Neptune and Pisces is like kind of like almost like the almost ultimate imaginal dreamscape placement for Pisces to be. And I think with ideals and spirituality and like your beliefs and even if people are atheists, they have something they hold up in some way or another as like a Neptunian ideal. Everything is just, there's this quickening. Um, it's a yes, there is a potential for more conflict coming into the world in this time period, of course. And like we mentioned before, the last time Neptune went into Aries was like the beginning of the US Civil War. But I've been really thinking a lot about, just how dynamic that is in terms of it being at the Aries point in this process of the retrograde, the eclipse just being there, and just what like your dream, whatever this larger idealistic goal, what keeps you alive, what gives you reason for getting up and feeling passionate about life and giving your sense of purpose, such as being there's more animation there.
I like that too because one of the things that's interesting about the ingress is the fact that, essentially we have a Neptune ruled by Mars now, and Mars is over here in Cancer trining Saturn. So Mars is in this position with Saturn too that feels like kind of fortifying or strengthening. So when you think, like when you're bringing up the idea of like, what is your ideal? What is your dream? Like what does your soul want? I feel like there's sort of this inspirational quality with the fire, but this water is tapping into more soul urges. And then Mars and Saturn together is like, okay, well, how do we, you know, I mean, on high side, it's a very creative combination to look at like the long term of like what you actually care about and what's important to you. And then how do you, manifest that? How do you manifest the dream into reality? How do you pioneer past, where you've been or break your glass ceiling in a way? Um, there that's kind of what's coming up for me here. I mean, obviously I've never lived in Neptune Neptune Aries land, but I do agree that as someone with Neptune and Sag, I'm actually kind of really excited about that flow versus so much of the square energy of, us Neptune and Sag people
Yeah.
dealing with the Pisces
So
Neptune.
last time when we talked about this fire, you think about the Russian Revolution, like World War One's going on, and like that October Revolution, that was a Neptune, 1917. That was Saturn, Neptune, and Leo. So there is like when you think about that fervor of like ideals with Neptune, is something we can think about. But the last time they were in Aries, I mentioned before, is back early 1700s. So there already had been like the Age of Enlightenment, but when you think about that sort of like it makes me think a lot about the exaltation of the sun, I think, and almost like people can get very like elevated in their thinking. And I think the thing to watch will be how this intersects with all this new technology and you know AI and these new
Yeah.
forces coming in.
which draws us into the Neptune Pluto sextile that will eventually happen here. I mean, it's
Yeah.
obviously
And
an orb,
people,
but yeah.
and especially too, people talk about like technocrats and like people coming into government, the people that think they know best and they're more like scientists or engineers. And I was looking at when the first term of technocrats was actually even used. I think it was 1919. So it was shortly after that. Saturn, Neptune, and Leo wasn't exactly with it, but um, there's that kind of quality. But again, this could be very people that want to change their life and be active and active movement. I think there's a lot there. And I think it really signals again that when I talked before about new paradigms of like scientific belief or invention or things that really alter our conception of reality, we're starting to enter the time where there could be stuff really building around this. Yeah, coming in
Yeah.
here strong.
No,
And so then there's at the same time that Pisces part of our chart is just getting if you have
I
anything in
know.
mutable signs, everything is getting combined there. There's Mercury retrograde, North Node, Venus retrograde, Saturn all coming together here. Um, and
Yeah.
so there's
So early April.
it's still this very liminal, chaotic, changing vibe, with this entrance of Neptune into Aries. I'm really, it's like anything can happen, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like once again, it kind of brings me back to this like soup quality or this
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
swirling the drain because it's like
Things not taking
it's
form yet here for sure,
yeah.
right? Yeah,
No,
it's
this is
not nothing's taking form
no.
yet. Yeah.
It's half disorienting, half
Hmm.
imaginal like
Yeah.
um yeah. So once again, breathe. Meditate. I think this would be a wonderful time to like just meditate in general and just like get in touch with like your inner world and your inner quality. Because the world could be loud. We're in an Aries cycle. Obviously, if we have a big ingress, there's gonna be things going on. That's just like the nature of outer planet ingresses. Is there? I don't think there are slow moving. I think they enter and we hear it. Like so basically we're going to carry on here and we see this whole Venus Mercury North Node conjunction. Here we have our second Venus
Yeah.
Saturn.
One just really quick about that. We talked before, I think it was around January 18th that they were together
Mm-hmm.
before, and we talked about how way back at the start of the year something's happening. This is where we come back for April 7th and then later April 24th around that time. Because Venus conjoins Saturn here, goes back, but then comes forward again. So we actually get two Venus Saturn conjunctions across April. And
And we
those
still
are
have
taking
Mars configured too, which is
yeah,
interesting
Mars
within
is
all this.
trining.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Venus and Mercury is slowing down here to station.
Yep.
Also close to Saturn, but they don't actually get together, I don't think.
No, they don't. They don't meet. They're very close, but they're about a degree off, degree and a half.
Yeah, so it's basically the same day. April 7th is so yeah, that same day that Venus and Saturn are together is when Mercury stations
Mercury stations. We have
direct.
Mars trying. I mean,
And
there's a
Mercury
watery
stationing
flow
direct
going
on the
on.
North Node. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there again, yeah, there's a real inner what it makes me think too is like with we're talking about ideals and like arrows, this is a part where like we're really getting taken into something really deep.
Mm.
This final part of Pisces, there's a way that Austin Coppock wrote about that third decan of Pisces in his book 36 Faces that I've always resonated with because I have a bunch of stuff right here in my chart. My Sun and Jupiter are around where all this is happening.
Yep.
Um, and that is very much about having this great passion for this, what you want to, your dream and your ideal, and you can kind of give everything to it. And so there might be a sense of like, of disillusionment around that in some cases or having to let go of it, but you also might be really tapping into here this deeper, like that deep dream that's going to carry you forward. But it could, like we were saying, it's like a soup. It's formless. This is maybe going to take shape over this period of time. So if you're having more difficulty in this part of the passage, just kind of like get through it
Wait
because
till Taurus
something,
season.
yeah, stuff will be coming into form. Yep, because then we get Mercury, Venus going direct, and there starts being that's one of the I think big moments of the year is was it April 13th
Yeah.
is Venus going direct because we just we're finally out of those triple
Yeah.
retrogrades of Mars, Mercury, Venus. So
Right.
it's a
I mean,
big big change.
these are all personal planets. So this is like, it's a lot of reconfiguration of, even though there's so much going on in the collective, there's a lot of reconfiguration going on in personal
Yeah,
lives. And especially seeing this pile up in Pisces and the trine with Mars. Water signs are connective, merging, emotional. There's dependent. There's a lot of relational quality that's happening probably in this moment too, especially since Venus is making, having a direct station on Saturn, basically. So there can be a lot of fated stuff around unions, and who's bonding together, who's, creating barriers or boundaries and, going separate ways. It's a very transitionary
there is
spirit.
it's definitely one where there could be endings. There also could be like redoing relationships, like just reconfigurations of
Yeah, something will change within it no matter
agreements
what.
or
Yeah.
yeah, something or just how you're relating to one another,
And
something
while,
important.
yeah, and why we, have to lean into the Pisces, sort of the compassion, the empathy, the idea of like, unconditional love. Like there's no way things are not going to change here. So if there is room to commit and rebond, then there has to be this, there just has to be this space to be able to come together, and that requires a lot of times, compassion and yeah, feel it being in someone else's shoes. So yeah, so April 13th, big, right? Venus is gonna she's hovering over 24 degrees for a while. Saturn's still moving forward, so we got
Right.
Mercury. Yeah,
Yeah,
hold on,
that was like
Mercury.
just a real quick thing. Yeah, we
Yeah,
don't have
go
to
ahead.
dwell on it, but that's when we get Mercury back into Neptune
April,
zone right on the
mm-hmm.
0 point. Yeah.
April
So it is,
16th.
yeah,
Yeah. So
that is
so
also
well,
really
which is
good.
interesting, Gray, because right, Mercury retrograded over Neptune, and that was at 20, right before it moved in. So it's almost like Mercury is privy of a final Neptune in Pisces message, and then it's privy to essentially the first one who's privy to a Neptune and Aries message. Um,
Yeah, and it's just a couple of days after this, then that Mars goes into Leo. So that this is a really one of the it seems I mean I know we keep saying oh it's like the big week, but this is a particularly big week of this whole stretch of time because they're all direct. Venus has gone direct, and then Mercury goes into Aries, Mars goes into Leo. I think that combination right here of all those factors, there's still the Venus Saturn forming here. We're not done with that yet, but we're back into the Mars Pluto opposition building with intensity and with the Mercury Neptune, all these cycles are like they're all coming together here. It's not like we're still in a flux situation, I think, but there's much more of a propulsive kind of force, I guess, is what I'm feeling here coming. There's movement for sure coming through here big time.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with Mars, back in Leo, trining that Neptune too. So, we're actually getting action energy in a flow with sort of these Neptunian and Mercurial impulses. Venus coming to terms with Saturn here,
Yeah.
officially pretty
So what's
much.
wild?
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say
April
it's happening.
21st.
The fact that that happens so close to the Mars
That's what I
Pluto
was thinking.
opposition building, yeah, and then yeah. I mean,
Which
um,
happened before because didn't we see wasn't it? Oh gosh, we've looked at a lot. But what was I talking
yeah,
about during that one the full moon on Mars.
yeah,
And
they're trining. I
that was
think.
Venus and Saturn together, getting ready to move together for the first time. And we were
Oh,
bringing up
right.
sort of this. Okay, so anyways, to me this feels like the next level of what maybe that story looked like on more of a resolve because obviously these are the last passings of both of these aspects, especially interpersonally, around April 21st-ish, give or take.
No, this is a big day because you're right, there was that full moon that then the full moon with Mars retrograde kind of had Venus heading towards Saturn. It's
Yeah.
around like January 18th they're together. And then this is always like a last quarter moon that's configured to the Mars Pluto opposition
Yep.
building. So there's something about
And
I know
essentially Sun Pluto
people
too.
can get afraid of relationships ending during a Venus retrograde, but if you're in a long-term relationship that's going to be a long-term relationship, you're going to get through it. But obviously things are going to change, and like you're saying, that's why a lot of us have been saying that our astrologers, pay attention to this Mars Pluto. So like if you're listening to this now, way ahead of this time, what's going on with the Mars Pluto opposition and how's that impacting you in your relationship? Because it is by the time, we have them all coming together simultaneously, like Venus, Saturn, that can be working things out and whatever your, and not just personal relationship, maybe there's business partnerships,
Mm-hmm.
there's work relationships, there's
There's so many relationships.
contracts, there's, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's all part of the same story. And what's wild is, yeah, it's these days here that they're all it's the where we come to the end of them finally completing the last aspect.
Yeah. And it is pretty, we are on the solar eclipse cycle still. This is the last quarter of it. So it's sort of that crossroads, that happens right before the full waning aspect. So it does feel very pivotal. Especially in the sense of maybe like pressure that you've been holding on to for a long time, because Mars and Pluto together is, as we've been saying, it's an elongated story, and now it's coming to the point where it's going to maximize the last time and then release as the military plane goes over my house right now. So I'm talking about this. um,
There is a scintillating sextile also between Venus and Uranus. I guess that's something to
oh,
say as we're
okay.
heading into that Saturn. So there's something here I think about, like, yeah, I mean obviously as Mars Pluto's completing, as Venus Saturn North Node is starting to complete, Uranus is coming in there with Venus, where yeah, it
And
makes me feel like you're really whatever comes up with a Venus retrograde, there's going to be a way to kind of work it into the form. It ends up coming into like make these new
which
agreements and bonds and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think we kind of like we glossed over just a little bit, maybe because it was a scintillating sextile, was the fact that Uranus and Saturn are in a sextile
Oh
too.
yeah. Yeah, we should. That actually is a big. That's not a everyday thing.
That is not an everyday thing. And
That's just a big background. It's one
yeah,
of the
that's
things
a
where it's
big
like a
background.
background thing, but it's like it's significant, and
And
it
that's going on the
actually
whole time,
it's
basically, of
going on the whole
everything we were
time.
just talking about
Yeah, and the
for
the Venus
April.
retrograde, the Mercury retrograde's all part of it. The eclipses come into it too, setting it off. The Virgo
Yeah.
eclipse especially. But it is a sign to me that amidst all this chaos and all this stuff going on, that you can come out of, there's something that you can be building and developing through this time period. And the change just doesn't stop. So it's not like one of these things like, oh, when's this gonna end? It's like it's not ending. We're gonna keep going through more and
We are
more
fixated on change.
wild astrology. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we are
yeah.
fixated on it. And so, and
But yeah, I like that sex style between them, definitely.
I think so too. Like, I think it's good for innovative form. I think it's
Hmm.
good for, liberating potential
Yeah.
blockages or heaviness. Like, where have you been stuck? What's been going on there? How can you, like, level up 2.0? Let me
Hmm.
upgrade you. That's what's going on with this. So around April 22nd, we have the Venus North Node Saturn piece. I mean, most of April, we are getting just Venus, Saturn, getting this Uranian connection. We're getting Mars, Pluto. Like, it's April. Woo, a lot going on there. And we still haven't perfected that Mars Pluto. Is that going to take us
Yeah,
into,
it's the 26th, I think.
okay, so April 26th, which
I had written
essentially,
down I had written down Venus, Saturn's like the 24th and Mars, Pluto's like the 26th, but they're basically right around there the same
yeah.
time. Yeah.
And we already saw them, in the station of Venus. Like this thing is just a thing for most of April. Just because of how slow Venus and Mars are both moving. I mean, Mars isn't that slow, but I don't know, it's not up to speed yet, is it? Oh,
No, it is. It's
is it up to full speed?
oh no, I don't
Sorry,
think
I'm just
so.
looking now.
I don't
Gosh,
think it's up
Gray,
to
there's
full
so
speed,
much.
but Mars is moving now though.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's amazing how that Mars, Pluto, Venus, Saturn,
And
we
the
have like each,
sun, I mean, we're getting sun Mars, we're getting sun Pluto. Like,
yeah,
there is just so much happening in mid to late April that
yeah,
we might have to just leave you with that. Get ready to live
yeah.
it.
And then that feeds basically right. We're right at there's a new moon in Taurus that happens like right after that because that's like a waning moon. And so this is a new moon, which is what I think is interesting with this new moon is that we're still in the fallout from all those aspects. But like in terms of like these multiple Venus Saturns and these multiple Mars Plutos, like we actually are done with them. They're separating, and then we get this like Taurus new moon that comes in. So I really like that in terms of this sense of renewal coming in, following those. I mean, it's a whole process unfolding here, but I like that for kind of lifting us out of those really intense aspects that have been going on, like not quite completing, and then they've at least completed now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like Venus can take everything that she's been through, and now she's like, okay, well, let me inform you, Taurus, new moon, of all that I've been through, and let's try to stabilize whatever this is. Let's get let's get a little bit of stability on it,
Yeah,
or just
because
enough.
what's
Yeah.
amazing is then that like you're saying, the Venus she is the Lord, she rules this new moon, and so that takes us back to the Venus Saturn, and the new moon squaring the Mars Pluto, so it's really connected to both of those two
Yeah.
things.
Venus,
But has
we're seeing pretty much Venus Mars themes for the entirety of the beginning of the year. Like that's
yeah,
such a big, even though we have
absolutely.
these big outer planet shifts that are going on, like there's so much of an interpersonal story going on here.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess yeah,
So
keep
let's
going
see. I'm gonna
as we move
carry
forward.
on. We gotta
While you're
keep
doing that,
on
I was just going to
moving.
say that as you're showing here, and we get this new moon coming in, we also, I forget the degree Jupiter station retrograde, but we are coming into the
Oh, we're
zone
about there. Yeah.
where Jupiter originally went retrograde in Gemini. So there's something interesting too about this new moon cycle coming in there as Jupiter's getting back to where
Yeah,
it's stationed before.
it's about
We don't
to
need a
it's going into unknown territory here since
yeah.
we haven't retrograded. Are getting Venus Neptune.
That's the Venus
Venus moves back
Neptune.
into Aries on April 30th, and then we get Venus Neptune just right after that. So we're getting once again, Mercury and Venus are getting flavors of what Neptune looks like. And
Yeah.
it's gonna burn off a lot of that water, right? Because she's been in Pisces for a while and she's like, okay, back in Aries. Let's do this. I'm feeling, more confident about where I'm at, despite what has happened.
Totally. I mean
Let's do this.
I think the Mercury Neptune will be good to tune into that, but I do think, like you're saying, this Venus Neptune is going to be especially an important one to um, get more
Um,
of a feel for that Neptune and Aries, what's going on with it. Yeah.
yeah, and she's going to be in that scintillating sextile
Yeah.
with Pluto again, who
Pluto.
is stationing retrograde on May 4th. So it's interesting. She revisits this spot. And then Pluto goes retrograde right after the moon in Leo actually makes an opposition to that Mars Pluto. So we've done all the Mars Pluto. We've combusted, and now Pluto's going retrograde. So that will definitely be a moment, especially if you have planets at the early degrees of fixed signs. You're going to feel that station. Mercury moves into Taurus.
Taurus.
So now we're starting to have planets move into Taurus about, mid-May. We've got a full moon in Scorpio on May 12th. That, guess who it's configured to? Our friend Uranus. Our friend Uranus, who is back, has a little stability with the Saturn component. Um, I mean, yeah. Venus and Mars are like so rulers of that are lining up to
Coming into
another
trine, yeah.
trine. Can Venus move
There's
fast enough to get there? I think she will, yeah, right? Yeah, I think so.
they eventually come together. I forget right now what the date is of that. I had written it down.
I think it's like a
But
week later. Oh no,
May
no.
22nd, maybe.
Yeah, May 21st, 22nd.
Yeah.
Um,
The thing that's also happening at that point, so it is interesting because like there's so many huge days where like, oh my gosh. And this is like one particular day that maybe wouldn't have stood out besides, the Venus Mars coming in. But yeah, it's like a full moon opposite Uranus that just throw in another big burst
throw
of
in
like a
another pip.
really dramatic lunation, just shaking more stuff up than is already going on. And there is then Jupiter coming into square the nodes here, which I just think is a little bit more relevant due to Jupiter also
Yeah,
ruling the north node. So, and that's up at the northern bending. So, again, it just makes me think about all the different information, and we've talked about this before. It's the same themes, I think, of the nodes in Pisces now ruled by Jupiter, but it's just this is a real intensification of that, and maybe some deep being brought deeper into this kind of crossroads tension with it. I mean, because again, it's that node, the square Jupiter squaring the nodes is basically happening as Saturn goes into Aries. And so
yeah. So
whatever
let's
is going on with these bigger changes signified by that, I think there's just this intensification of our beliefs and our vision of life and all those types of things are it's it's
yeah,
it's
that's
it's it's
definitely
significant, but the heart of what's going on is really the Saturn Neptune coming together
yeah.
more
Well,
than
I
the
mean,
Jupiter
Jupiter's
squaring
such
the
a big
nodes.
piece of it though, because
Yeah,
it's an activating point, especially once it
yeah,
moves into Cancer,
yeah.
which I mean, I almost kind of like want to set it up. So here we have Saturn moving in
Mm-hmm.
on May 25th, right?
Mm-hmm.
24th technically.
24th.
Um
Right around the same time Mercury Uranus come together, which is interesting. I mean, there is like this Uranian activation going on with the full moon in Mercury Uranus as Saturn goes into Aries, which is interesting.
yeah. And so now we're in a Gemini season basically. We've crossed over.
Mm.
Um And so because Gemini season is so big, I kind of want to like move to a little bit
Hmm.
of like
You
well, let's
move
just
forward,
go,
yeah.
let me head up the new moon here. 6 degrees of Gemini with Mercury configured right there.
Yeah.
Mercury is in another scintillating sextile. I think maybe that's with
Yeah.
Saturn and Neptune there.
Was it May 25th Mercury goes into Gemini? So right before this, so that is an important sextile to that Saturn, Neptune, and obviously also Mercury's trining Pluto. I think we moved over Pluto's stationing, but let's not worry about that. That was a while ago.
Oh no, we talked about that. We
Did we
talked
talk about
about
Pluto
that because
stationing? Okay,
Venus
I forgot.
was in the
Okay,
scintillating sextile with
okay,
Pluto
that was
who
from
was
Pluto
stationing.
stationing. Yeah, yeah. But Mercury's going right into that. Yeah, so Mercury moving from the sextile with Saturn Neptune into the trine with Pluto as this new moon's happening, and new moon's also configured well to them in that same way. Yeah, I do think this is a really important one for coming into a relationship with what's going on. I mean, the entrance of Saturn into Aries is I mean, there can't be really enough said about how big this is. this is Saturn in its fall. And so while I don't think I am somebody that, when you have fallen planets in your natal chart, there's really interesting dynamic things that you can do with that. And there's also going to be a whole group of people starting to go through Saturn returns that have Saturn in Aries. Um, but it is important to think about the fact it is the fall of Saturn, and the fact that then Saturn's also coming to close with Neptune. It really just makes me think of like this falling apart of things, just kind of, it seems even more intense in some way than the Saturn Neptune balsamic and Pisces. It's hard to say which one is, but this also will have much more, I think, of like people wanting to do something. I mean, it makes me think of like it really sparking movement, sparking people being kind of more lit. Um, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know
there's
if there's
more.
stuff you want to say about
Yeah, there's
that.
definitely more of like an activation.
Hmm.
To me, it feels like walls coming down,
Hmm.
to some extent. Whatever that
Hmm.
looks like. I mean, it could be a literal wall coming down. You think about obviously like Berlin Wall area, but think about the walls that want to be built here in the, US, things like that. I mean, I don't know, it's kind of hard to hold there. But it also thinks about like what we've been crystallized as individuals, and what can potentially fall there, especially in the Aries area of our chart. There could be, yeah, just I feel like maybe because the beauty of part two of this program is that we don't have to do the overview. So I think that maybe we can pick up on some of those Saturn, Aries, like do a
Yeah,
little bit more and share a little bit more on
do a
that,
little bit more about that. Yeah.
to give them proper lip service. That's not just in connection with, although Neptune and Saturn together, it's hard to deny, but we can think a little bit more about like how Saturn and Aries will, how it could manifest. But once again, we're not claiming we know.
So basically, from here, this point, all the way through the Cancer solstice, they just keep getting closer. They'll get closer together. They'll get very close in July. And
Yeah.
although they do not form an exact conjunction, the Saturn Neptune dynamic here, being on an Aries point, I'm just very curious what does happen. Do we just start getting premonitions of bigger change happening that doesn't really hit fully with things coming into more dramatic form until later on when they're coming more like together
Yeah.
exactly? Or are we already getting some big waves of really dramatic events
Well, I think,
starting to
with
come in already
Aries,
here?
yeah, we think about Aries, a lot of times Aries has that quality of like a big burst, but then maybe it could fizzle out. So
Hmm.
maybe we do see sort of that like magnanimous, like, poof, let's do like this. But there's just, I mean, I remember when I went through Saturn, or Neptune was opposing my Saturn, and it was squaring my Mars too. And it's like whatever you try to bring form to, like if you're really like, I want to do this, it's just kind of collapses.
Hmm.
Um, in when it's in sort of this specific state. So I think that we will see bursts of things, but they can be like explosive in the sense where it gets they don't have the longevity. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean it
Well,
doesn't have impact, but maybe it doesn't have longevity in that moment, or there just has to build on a story.
I do think ultimately there are things with long-term impact, but what I think you're really right about is here, the fact that they don't actually form the exact conjunction. One thing I would definitely caution people about is like there might it's one of those situations where I feel like it might look like certain things are going to happen that aren't necessarily going to happen. And when we think about Saturn, Neptune anyway, there is a side of stuff about just things not being the way they really look and illusion and
Mm.
you know, so that is one thing to keep in mind where I think, well, we can definitely expect like faster moving events like you're talking about, but because they don't actually get together exactly, and then they'll come back to Pisces, I think there's so much
Yeah.
more to come where it might look like something's going to happen a certain way that doesn't. And especially I'm thinking more in terms of things you might be afraid of concerning
Mm,
events in the world that don't end up totally going as
actually, yeah.
yeah, something else happens. Like there's a change, and that could certainly happen in our own lives as well.
Well,
Um,
I think, I mean, like a big thing about Aries is impatience, and the thing about Saturn is patience. And
mhm,
so there could be this quality of like having impatience with things when really, or, just wanting to, how do we just handle, move through, do it? When really there's just this level of patience that needs to happen with the whole Saturn Neptune story, because as we both know, we're on the threshold. We're moving back into Pisces. There's more to go there. So it's like, how do you feel the rush of energy but also acknowledging that like slow and steady actually wins this race,
mhm,
you know?
exactly, yeah. And then
Um,
the other thing is there's actually I'd say a hot sextile
a hot
between
sextile.
Venus and Jupiter there right at the end. So it's interesting that they hit that sextile as they're about to change. And one of the
Oh, it
things
is
that
a
I
hot
was
sextile.
yeah, when I was thinking ahead with the looking ahead at the year, another big point for me in the year was actually what you're about to show, which is yeah, Venus goes into Taurus and then
Yes.
Jupiter goes into Cancer because we have
Hmm.
talked before about, essential dignity. We can notice that at times with the transits and the quality of. So we've had we did have exalted Venus, but she's really mixed up in like total chaos, and then all this time of her in Aries, this whole long transit of in her opposite sign, this whole long transit of Jupiter in his opposite sign, and now we get Venus goes into her domicile, Jupiter goes into his exaltation, and both benefics are actually very strong. Saturn's in fall. There's a kind of a flip in terms of that, and with now Jupiter coming into Cancer, where there is that long retrograde. Now there's still the square, right? There's Jupiter in Cancer is going to be squaring Saturn, Neptune the whole time,
Yes.
but getting that exalted Jupiter, I think there's a lot of like restoration the rest of this period that up until the solstice with Venus and Taurus and Jupiter and Cancer. It's a time where hopefully there can be some nice growth and using that exalted quality of Jupiter to work within the the dissolving, shape-shifting
Uh,
forms of Saturn and
Saturn,
Neptune to
yeah.
do what you
Hmm.
can with it. Um, I think
Yeah.
it's not to be like, of course, given what we see going on in the world in the United States at least, and Jupiter, I mean, yeah, I think this could be massive transfers of wealth and people, or at least people trying to do that. But again, because we have Saturn, Neptune, if there's stuff like that going on more that gets exposed, that's all part of the thing. I'm just wondering, like, what could happen that spurs people to wake up and want to do something and actually unite, and we'll see what
Exactly.
happens.
I mean, there has to be some sort
But
of catalyst. Like that's the thing
yeah,
is like you has to get it has to get extreme, it has to get absurd, it has to go to like the next level until like people feel called to get involved. Like
right.
and why it made so much sense to me how like honestly how the election turned out and like what just because it's part of the story. Like that needs to happen for change like to exist.
Hmm.
And honestly, I think this is a lovely time mid-June when
Hmm.
in the sense of we've all been dealing with Jupiter, Saturn squares in the mutable signs, and now we finally get in a cardinal energy. And I don't know, it kind of feels like it might not be the end all be all of the growth moment, but it could be like the big one that we at least it's enough to like catapult us into the next part of the story that we've been waiting for, and we're not as so much in uncertainty. There was obviously going to be levels of uncertainty, but there's just enough opportunity here, I think, to really finally make some sort of move that takes some of our stories out of a potential limbo or just always being in this, change. Um,
Yeah, I mean, and so I think it was you don't need to show it,
Oh,
but
and the
it was
Mars is squaring
June
Uranus at the same
11th.
time.
June 11th, there's a full moon in Sagittarius, which actually ruled by that exalted Jupiter. So
Yes.
that's kind of coming in too as part of this. And then right after, or as we come to the ingress, there is the thing though where we have Jupiter becoming exalted, but Jupiter's also at the end of its cycle, so Jupiter's like combust at the sun's going
Yeah.
towards it. So that even though it's actually right after the solstice on I believe June 24th that we actually get that renewal of Jupiter in its exaltation. So we get that pretty soon, and it's interestingly of pretty soon after Jupiter enters Cancer, and it's interestingly squaring the Saturn Neptune. So that's
Yeah.
all happening right after the solstice. But yeah, the solstice chart is wild with the fact the Aries ingress was Pluto
I
Aquarius
know.
ascendant, and this one's even more close, like right
Yeah.
a degree away. Yeah.
But we're gonna have to save this one,
And
folks, because
Uranus on the IC
Uranus
again.
at 29 degrees. Yeah, so basically we're gonna do the rest of the
Yeah.
year in the next episode, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about this ingress because there's a lot going on. We'll talk more about Jupiter in Cancer. We will talk about Uranus moving into Gemini.
Yeah, Uranus and
Um,
Gemini, it's that's a
that's
huge extra factor that we haven't even gotten
Yeah,
to
well,
yet.
I was calling it the cliffhanger.
Yeah, the cliffhanger,
We have a
yeah.
cliffhanger. You haven't seen that yet. So there's going to be plenty to talk about, and hopefully you're still with us. Gray, I think we're at 3.5 hours right now. That's so funny. I thought doing 2 episodes would actually cut us down, but we did half an episode in the
Yeah. I got too excited at the beginning talking about
I
all
know.
the things happening, but
It's okay. It's exciting.
yeah.
There's a lot going on. So I'm gonna save our impressions because I was like, oh, I feel we've given some impressions.
Oh
So
yeah.
we're gonna let you sit with this. And if you're watching this on YouTube, comment below. Let us know what you think. Are you feeling what we're talking about? Do you see other things in the charts? Like where's your head at with it? We'd love to hear some comments there. Like and subscribe, those things too. Gray, remind us where people can find you, what you got going on.
Yeah, graycrawford.net is where you can find my work and you can subscribe to my website there. I am pretty sure between now or around the time I'm not sure when you're releasing this, but I'm seriously thinking of doing a Saturn Neptune series of classes or sort of like almost like a container for people to also talk about their charts and kind of relate to the Saturn Neptune approaching configuration that we've been spending all this time talking about. That would probably go from the solstice, winter solstice, Capricorn solstice until like late January, something like that. Just like that kind of first section of the year ahead of the coming conjunction. And so if that's of interest to you, be a way to also work with your chart and think about the meaning of the cycle, and all the stuff that's coming. And so if that be of interest to you, to just check out my site and you'll get more information on that. And I think related to the one, I guess, parting inspirational words I'd have about Saturn Neptune. When I gave a talk at NORWAC, I had noticed already Bell Hooks had a Saturn Neptune in her chart, and I got more and more like blown away by like Saturn Neptune connections with her. And so Bell Hooks may not be who you immediately comes to mind with Saturn Neptune, um, but I think her work is very inspirational. And her book in particular, that a lot of you probably read, but if you haven't, All About Love, did come out around the time of a Saturn Neptune waxing square, I should say. And I would recommend that book just in terms of having this hopeful message about the way our culture has turned away from love, but just the importance of love and that force of
Mm.
love, and how it dissolves fear, among other things. It's amazing how far we've gone down since that book came out like in 1999. But I think she's a really inspirational author to look into, whose work is actually pretty practical, of benefit for thinking about things, and still is applicable to a lot of stuff going on right now that um, I'd encourage people to look into more.
I do love that for all the Pisces action that we were talking about, right? I mean, it's that universal love. It's like love heals all, love conquers, love can conquer anything. Love can break through darkness. Like, so I don't know. I think
I
that's a
know
very potent.
it's a kind of thing where people say it and it can sound like a cliche, but like you're just saying, it's actually so true this year. It's
It
like it is
is.
absolutely true. It's almost like the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm here for that. I think that is a great suggestion. Love, love. What is it? All you need is love. Brr, 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 brr. All together now. All right, great. Well, we got to wrap this up. So if you like, subscribe, leave a comment below. If you want to find me, energeticprinciples.com. Um, Same with the old Instagrams. Leave a review if you're listening to the audio version of this. Spread the good word, share it, spread the love, share it with a friend who likes long podcasts. Yeah, just and be on the lookout because we will come back with part two. I don't know, depends on Grace's schedule, maybe next month, maybe further. We'll get back to you, but there will be another one and we'll take you through it. Um yeah, I think I'm in a daze. I'm in a Neptunian daze.
Well,
Thank you.
it's funny because when you brought that song up by the Beatles, it made me think that I'm pretty sure when I was looking at what happened when Saturn was in Aries, and I'm pretty sure the Magical Mystery Tour, in fact, was a Beatles Saturn and Aries
That does not surprise me.
album. So, and we certainly are entering a Magical Mystery
That's so
Tour
funny. The
this next
magical
year.
mystery tour is
Yeah.
coming to take you away.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so you
definitely
gonna get on
happening.
the bus or you get
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to listen to that album. I'm just gonna think about that's so funny. So maybe we'll call this the Magical Mystery Tour 2025. So get ready. All right, Gray. Well, we've talked their ear off enough. We'll be back with part two. So good luck out there. Enjoy your holidays. And yeah, thanks again, Gray, for joining me for year six. It's always
Yeah.
awesome.
You're welcome. And I hope everyone listening can embrace the purpose of the chariot to the vibe of the Magical Mystery Tour. Um, Maybe that can be your next tarot deck.
Oh, maybe so. Oh my goodness. Well, we never know what we're gonna create, right?
Yeah,
That's exciting.
it's
All right,
definitely a
my
Magical
friends.
Mystery Tour chariot book
I
this year.
know. Oh, I feel like I'm in a magical mystery tour. All right. My brain is swirling. We will get at you later. Thank you for listening as always. May the stars be with you.